Time. Leisure time. Did you ever stop to think how much leisure time you really have? Some of us put our leisure time to good use. And some of us, Ken Michaels, for example, spend most of our leisure time just moping.
Moping? He thinks I'm moping. Well, who wouldn't mope? There's nothing to do, nobody's around. You know how it is. I went down to the bowling alley, went over to the drugstore. None of the gang was there. All my friends are busy, so what's for me to do?
Do you suppose Ken has more leisure time than his friends do?
Huh? Well, no, I don't have more time. We all spend about the same amount of time in school, and the rest is leisure time. I've got nothing to do but wait for supper. My friends have more things to do. They're lucky.
Ken's pretty lucky, too.
Listen to that. All right, I'll bite. Why am I lucky?
Because you have so much leisure time. Time in which you can do things you enjoy. Time in which you don't have to work.
Like this, huh? Is that good?
Let me show you a few things. Suppose you had lived 100 years ago. What would you have been like? Take a look.
Where? Oh, is that me? Is that what I would have looked like 100 years ago?
Well, perhaps. But now, well, let's look back 100 years again and see someone else.
Who? Hey, that's my dad.
Young man, you get off that bed and get to work. After you clean out the stable, you can build some new steps for the back porch. While I work 72 hours a week, no son of mine is going to loaf.
72 hours?
12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Tomorrow morning, young men, you're going out to get a regular job. You can work too, and earn your keep.
Not so good, Ken? Well, let's try another picture. Say about 50 years ago.
Oh, hello, son. Well, say, I've got some new pictures for the stereoscope. We'll look at them tonight. Don't forget about your chores. Have them all done by the time I'm through work. And keep the wood box full.
Boy, how long will you work, Dad?
Why, 10 hours. 10 hours a day, every day except Sunday.
60 hours a week? Boy.
Well, Ken, let's take a look at your father's time as it really is today.
Hi, Dad. You sure don't work as long hours as they used to.
That's right, Ken. It's a wonderful thing to be able to do so much work in so little time. This 40-hour week suits me fine. And some people even work shorter hours nowadays. But by the way, Ken, how would you like to play a quick round of golf before supper? I think we can work it in. And then later I'd like to shellac that new bookcase I'm making.
Well, Ken?
Yes, Dad does enjoy his leisure time. And to think that a few years ago, people didn't have nearly so much time to themselves.
Yes, we've gained a lot of leisure time in the last century or so. All of us.
Wait a minute. All of us? Mother should hear you say that. She's always complaining that she doesn't have enough time.
Well, let's see about that. Can you picture your mother as she might have been 50 years ago?
I guess so.
Why, that's hard work. It takes so much time, too. But that's woman's lot in life. Scrub clothes, carry water, bake bread, feed the chickens, till time to go to bed and then get up again to start all over again.
You see, Ken? Now, how about today?
My, this new washer certainly is a time saver. And I do need some extra time. Now, let's see, I want to do some shopping, but this first.
Wait a minute. This may be easier work, but it still looks like work.
Oh, well, I have to plan the program for the Women's Club next month. That's one of my favorite activities, you know. It does keep me busy, but, well, that's not work.
What do you think, Ken?
Well, Mother does have more leisure time now. But still, she's always busy. How does she find so many things to do? How can I find something to do with my extra time? Or for that matter, what about you? I don't know. It seems as if leisure time is a problem.
Well, let's see how your friends have met that problem.
I told him once my friends were all busy. Oh, busy. They have something to do with their time. Let's see. Last I saw of Dave, he was headed that-a-way.
You mean this way? Yes. Dave has a hobby of identifying birds. It's a pleasant way of spending his time, and besides, it helps him with some of his schoolwork. You can learn quite a bit from hobbies. Here's Bill. Some of his leisure time is spent doing part-time work at the bookstore. Along with earning some spending money, he's getting experience that will help him later on. And Alice is devoting some of her leisure to learning to sew. That's something she'll be glad she did when she's older. And right now, she gets a big kick out of it. Here's the way Marge spends some of her leisure time. She's learning to play the piano. She's getting a lot of pleasure from her own accomplishment, and she's acquiring a skill that will help her socially. And some of the fellows spend their time in group activities that are building them up physically, as well as providing them with a lot of fun.
So that's what they're all doing. No wonder I couldn't find them. I'll bet you think I should figure out something to do with my time. The question is, how will I know it's the right kind of thing? How will I know I'm using my time well?
Your father mentioned a bookcase he was making, didn't he? Remember how he worked at it last night? Mr. Michaels, you gain 3 important things from your hobby, don't you?
Do I? All I know is this is a pleasant change from my work, and I'm learning a few things. Someday, when I get more time, I'm going to make new furniture for the whole house.
Well, there you are. Do you see now, Ken?
I think so. A good use of leisure time should give you a change. It should help you learn things, and, well, I'm not sure about the third.
It's a good idea to have a long-range goal for your leisure time activities. But it isn't always easy to find a single occupation that will give you all 3 values.
Then you should have more than one activity?
It does help. Of course, even one thing to do is better than just moping. For instance,
Okay. I may have messed up. Well, I didn't mess up. I was looking around for the text. I should have done that yesterday. I thought it shouldn't be that hard. It's just a short story. I'm sure there's thousands of sources online to just like that are free and like accessible. I can just get the short story from. Could not. Just I don't know where everything is. Quite annoying, personally. I don't know if this works. It should work. It should be just fine. But I have it prepared so that it is on... It's the Internet Archive version, which should be okay, from what I can gather. That said... Today's stream is a reading stream. It's a short reading of The Gentle Creature, which is a short story by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. I I hope that sounds like the name. Fyodor Dostoyevsky is a Russian author, a writer, novelist, short story writer, and essayist. He is prolific, profound, renowned. Many people know him, or at least know him by name. Now, this is one of the things. This is one of the people that I should have listened to when. Well, as one of the writers that I should have listened to when people told me, hey, you should read this now. You should do it now. It will really help you think about things later. And I said, yeah, sure. Okay, I'll read it later. And here we are. Dostoevsky's themes, from what I can gather, and this is because I've not read anything from him yet. From what I can gather, he is quite... He was described, I believe he was described as one of the first existential writers, which I think is quite interesting. His work is often quite pondering and philosophical. That's quite good. Volume just right. Let me just set. Okay. Last minute trying to actually get the story tracks that you're saying you download. VTuber started the day before debut. No, I said I downloaded OBS the day before debut. I downloaded VTube Studio probably 2 weeks before debut. And then I started tinkering with it like a week before. But yes, that's today's reading is Fyodor Dostoyevsky. It is a short story, or at least I thought it would be a short story. Turns out it's not as short as I thought it would be. But I'm gonna I'll try to see if I can get through all of it in one stream. I don't think I'll make a second stream to do it. I've never done that. Sorry, I just realized I've never actually looked at myself drinking water. So I just took a sip of my water and I look terribly strange. My face looked terribly strange. So if my face looks terribly strange, and it looks like it's being warped, it's because I'm drinking water. Or I am in terrible habit putting my hand in front of my face, which I shouldn't do, but I do that too much. Hello, maybe. Hello, welcome to the stream. Today's stream is just a Dostoyevsky reading stream, very short. I've never read him before. I should have a long time ago. There are big novels to dive into. I think out of all the novels, I'm most interested in The Idiot. I think that one sounds the most fascinating to me personally. But those are the bigger ones. Those are longer. I don't think I'll be able to read them on stream. I don't think it'd be too prudent to. So I'm gonna try to at least read the shorter ones on stream. It'll be fun. Again, I've never read anything from him, so if it looks like I don't know what I'm doing, it's because I don't. It's a common theme. This is going to be the way it is until the end of time. I suggest everyone, if you haven't gotten used to it already, get used to it now. But when I read something, I'm reading it not because I'm trying to teach it or I'm trying to lecture it or anything. I'm reading it because I don't know it. I've not read it yet, and I'm trying to teach myself. That's all I'm doing. So don't expect anything insightful, I suppose, is the big comment from all that. Is there anything else I should talk about before we begin? Other than that, it's my first Dostoyevsky. I've only heard good things from him, or from people talking about him, but I don't know what his work is at all. There's stuff with translations and editions and all that. I have no clue which ones are which. I don't know which are the better versions or the worst ones. All I'm doing is picking the ones on the internet I can find that are free, and I'm reading those. Excuse me. Okay. I do know of, from reading around the context of this story, A Gentle Creature, that it is a stream of consciousness style of story that takes place sorry, that features a pawnbroker, not a pawn shop owner, a pawnbroker. I was mistaken when I said pawn shop owner, I think the other day. Pawnbroker and a woman, and this was inspired by, contextually, right? This was inspired by a suicide he had seen on Dostoyevsky had seen on the news quite recently before he like wrote this. So the Meek one is the same story, right? Yeah, it should be the same story. It's just an alternate translation, I believe. Yeah, but it should be the same story. I don't quite know how long it is exactly. Well, it's like probably what, 50 pages on this particular text PDF file, so we'll see. Yes, and there's a little preface by the author right before in this specific edition of the book. So we'll go through that. If there's any questions, I don't know why you would ask me. You should ask someone who's actually read Dostoevsky. But if you have any questions just for me, like, oh, what do you think about this part so far or whatever, then of course feel free to ask them. But I might not be able to attend to them as quickly because I'm going to be focused a bit more on reading. And I might see your comment, but I might not get back to your comment until a little while later. So I find like a stopping point. With all that said, let's come here. Okay. I might get in the way of some of the text. If that's the case, well, think of it as me trying to evade copyright. I'm going to have a link to the material in the description while I chapter it, which I should, because I haven't chaptered my VODs in like a week or something. I'm sure that is to the disappointment of some people. I must apologize. I just have not. It's been like a bit more hectic than usual, and I've also been trying to uptake myself, to have an uptick in streams in the past few days. So you must forgive me. Tomorrow I'm not streaming, so I might just spend the time tomorrow doing that or doing the thousands of other things I should actually be doing, but you know, it'll depend. If anyone has anything insightful to say, or just want to talk about Dostoevsky in general, maybe even not specifically Gentle Creature, feel free to. I forgot to mention this, and it was good last time that it just sort of happened organically, but feel free to just discuss things in the chat without, like, as long as you don't mind me not, if it's like not directly relevant to the exact thing I'm doing, if you don't mind me not looking, not responding to it, then by all means feel free to have discussions about whatever parts of anything you want to talk about. Yeah. That happened last time, when I read the Communist Manifesto. That was last week, I think. That was quite good. There was a lot of discussion from that really... It made me feel like it was doing these streams was worth something. Doing these streams were somewhat meaningful. Seeing discussion happen, so that's good. That is a very good thing. If anyone has thoughts, share them. You don't have to worry about sharing them with me, but just share them nonetheless. It's good exercise. It's good exercise, even if your thoughts are wrong, which usually they are. Usually your thoughts are wrong. We don't usually get it right on the first try or second. The third, but yeah. Plus it's Dostoyevsky. I'm sure there's things to talk about. Yes. All right. One more. Also, I've been meaning to review my sorry. Review my microphone settings and just like tinker with that. I haven't yet. My audio I have not checked in a while. I'm just gonna have faith that it's fine because it's the same settings, but it's like also I've been tinkering with other things. I don't know if it's affected that. Maybe my setup being like I'm like moving things around, so maybe that's made some things worse. If that's a minor thing that is on some people's minds, don't worry, it's on my mind too. All right, that's it. That's it. That's all the yapping out of the way. Get into the reading quite quickly. Hopefully, be able to actually finish it by the time I end the stream. Second, let me just clean my glasses. Okay. Let's begin. A gentle creature, subtitled A Fantastic Story. Short preface by the author. I hope my readers will forgive me if instead of my diary in its usual form, I'm giving them only a story this time. I'm afraid my only excuse is that I have been really working on the story for the better part of a month. I should, in any event, like to ask my readers for their indulgence. Now, a few words about the story itself. I've given it the subtitle of A Fantastic Story. Though I myself regard it as eminently realistic, but there is indeed a subcurrent of fantasy in it, particularly in the very form of the story, which I think it necessary to explain before starting on the story proper. The point is that it is neither fiction nor biography. Imagine a husband whose wife had committed suicide a few hours before by throwing herself out of a window, and whose dead body is lying on the table. His mind is in a state of confusion, and he has not, as yet, had time to collect his thoughts. He keeps pacing the room, trying to find some reason for what has happened, to gather his thoughts to a point. He is, besides, an inveterate hypochondriac, one of those men who talk to themselves. So there he is, talking to himself, telling the whole story, trying to explain it to himself. Notwithstanding the apparent consistency of his speech, he contradicts himself several times, both in the logic of his arguments and his feelings. He's justifying himself, accusing her, indulging in explanations that have no possible bearing on the case. You have here a certain crudity of mind and heart, as well as genuine deep feeling. Little by little, he really does explain the whole thing to himself and gathers his thoughts to a point. A succession of memories which he recalls does at last lead him inevitably to the truth, and truth inevitably elevates his mind and heart. Towards the end, even the tone of the story changes as compared with the general untidiness of its beginning. Truth dawns upon the unhappy man in a form that is both clear and definite, at least so far as he himself is concerned. That is the theme. No doubt the telling of the story, interrupted by all sorts of digressions and interludes, takes up a few hours, and it is told in a rather rambling way. Sometimes he is speaking to himself, sometimes he is addressing an invisible listener, a sort of a judge. And as a matter of fact, this is how it actually happens in real life. If a stenographer could have overheard him and taken down his words in shorthand, the result might have been a little rougher, a little less finished than the way I'm telling it, but the psychological sequence, so at least it seems to me, would have remained pretty much the same. It is this suggestion of a stenographer taking everything down in shorthand, after which I should have edited it, that I consider the fantastic element of this story. But this sort of thing, or something very like it, has been done several times in works of fiction. Victor Hugo, for instance, uses the almost identical method in his masterpiece, The Last Day of the Man Condemned to Death. And though he does not actually pretend to employ a stenographer, he has recourse to an even greater improbability by assuming that a man sentenced to death is able to, and has the time, to keep a diary not only on his last day, but also during his last hour, and literally his last minute. But had he not adopted his fanciful way of telling the story, his novel, one of the most realistic and most truthful he ever wrote, not have existed. Time of the userance, welcome. 20 minutes late, no you're not, don't worry. We're basically at the ads part of the film. Yeah, that's pretty much what's going on. This is the 30 minutes of advertising they play before the film starts, and you're here just in time. Don't worry. Plus, I'm just reading a text. It's not much to, there's not much to be like, I need to be there now to see it live. You don't have to. You really don't. Anyways, that was the introduction. Very interesting already. I'm already very compelled by the way he explained why this tension he has between subtitling it a fantastic story, whereas he himself sees it as an eminent reality, as in his words, right? Fantastic. I love it already. And I don't say that because it would be good to say that. I say that because I mean it. The comparison to Victor Hugo's work and like the prisoner or the person on death sentence who has to or rather Victor the writer, who has to write as if there was a sort of stenographer to tell the truth of something that couldn't possibly happen because, you know, the person's on death row. Find it hard to believe they would have a diary. So quite interesting. I think that's an apt comparison for here's what the fantastical elements are and why I think they add to the realism is, you know, the way I saw him say it. By the way, watch the first Vampire Therapist VOD and did the math. Andromachos has around 3.4 times 10 to the power $35 if you had 1,000 at a 2.5% interest rate for 3,000 years. Huh. That is a good amount of money. I wish I had that much time and money. Oh, right. Last thing I will say before we continue is that my throat's been sore for a while. It's been sore for like a few weeks. I hope it wasn't obvious. But sometimes I'll just clear my throat in the middle of the reading, and what I do is I mute the mic and then I do it. I hope I don't forget to do that, and if I do, you'll know why. It's because I'm a little sick. Been sick for like longer than I'm usually sick, which is concerning a little bit, but also not too big of a deal because I don't have much going on at the moment, I think. We'll see. But yes, back to Dostoyevsky. Sorry. Chapter 1. Who was I and who was she? Well, while she is still here, everything is all right. I go up and have a look at her every minute, but they will take her away tomorrow, and how can I stay here alone? She is now in the sitting room on a table. 2 card tables put together side by side. They will bring the coffin tomorrow. A white coffin. White, Gros de Naples. However, that's not what... I keep on walking and walking, trying to explain the whole thing to myself. It's 6 hours now that I've been trying to explain it to myself, but I just can't gather my thoughts to a point. Can't do it. The trouble is I'm always walking. Now that's how it was. I'll simply tell it just as it happened. In the right order. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not pretend to be a literary chap, as I expect you can see for yourselves, but never mind. I'll tell it just as I understand it. That's the horrible part of it. I understand everything. You see, if you must know, I mean, if I'm to tell you everything from the very beginning, I first met her because she used to come to me to pawn things. She wanted the money to pay for an advertisement and The Voice, trying to get herself a job as a governess. No objection to living in the country or giving lessons to children at their homes and so on and so forth. That's how it began. At the time, I didn't of course think her any different from anyone else. She used to come to me like the rest and so on, but later I began to notice the difference. She was such a slender girl, very thin, fair, of medium height, always a little awkward with me, as though embarrassed. I cannot help thinking that she must have been the same with all strangers, and to her, of course, I was not different from anyone else considered as a man, and not as a pawnbroker. The minute she got her money, she'd turn around and go away. And all without uttering a word. Others usually started arguing, begging, haggling to get more money, but not this one. Took what she was given. I'm afraid I'm getting a little muddled. Yes, it was the things she brought first, which first of all attracted my attention. Silver gilt earrings, a cheap medallion, there wasn't anything I'd give more than 6p for. She knew herself, of course, that they were only worth 3p. But I could see that to her they were priceless. As a matter of fact, it was all that was left her by her mother and father. I got to know about it later. Only once did I permit myself to smile at her things, for you see, I never permit myself anything of the kind. In my dealings with the public, my manners are always those of a gentleman. A few words, polite and stern. But one day, she actually brought me the remnants, literally, of an old hareskin coat, and I couldn't refrain from making a rather mild joke about it. Dear me, how she flushed. Her eyes were large, blue, wistful, but how they blazed. She never said a word, though, took her remnants and went out. It was then that for the first time I noticed her specially, and I thought something the sort about her. That is, something of a special sort, yes. There's something else I remember, another impression. I mean, if you really want to know, it was really the most important impression which summed up everything, namely that she was so awfully young. So young that I could have sworn she wasn't a day older than 14. Actually, however, she was 15 years and 9 months to be exact. However, that wasn't what I wanted to say. That wasn't the total impression. The next day, she came again. I found out later that she had been to Dorbanarov and Moser with that precious fur coat of hers, but they don't accept anything but gold, so they wouldn't even talk to her. I, on the other hand, had once accepted a cameo from her, a really cheap one it was too, and having thought it over, was afterwards surprised at myself, for, you see, I don't accept anything but gold and silver either, and yet I took the cameo from her. That was the second time I had thought about her. I remember it very well. Excuse me. Honey tea will help. Hope you feel better soon. Thank you. Yeah, I remember you saying this last time, a few streams ago. Sorry to say that I said that advice was good and I didn't take it. It's a terrible thing I do. But I do promise I'll try to look for that, after this stream. Only for class? It's not class, I'm just reading a book. I'm reading a short story. It's not a class. And you're not late. This time, that is, from Moser, she brought me an amber cigar holder. Not a bad thing, something for a connoisseur, but again hardly worth anything to me, for we only deal in gold articles. As she came to me the day after her rebellion, I received her sternly. Sternness with me means dryness. However, as I was handing her the 2 rubles, I couldn't resist saying to her with a certain note of exasperation in my voice, I'm only doing it for you, for Moser would never have accepted such a thing from you. I put a special emphasis on the words for you, invested them quite deliberately with a certain meaning. I was furious. She flushed crimson again at the for you, but swallowed the insult, didn't fling the money back at me, took it like a lamb. That's what poverty does for you. But Lord, how she blushed. I realized that I'd hurt her feelings, but when she went out, I suddenly asked myself, is this triumph over her really worth 2 rubles? Dear, oh dear, I remember I asked myself that question twice. Is it worth it? Is it worth it? And laughing, decided that it was. Felt very jolly that time, but it wasn't a bad feeling. I did it deliberately, intentionally. I wanted to put her to the test. I wanted to do that because suddenly certain plans with regards to her began stirring in my mind. That was my 3rd special thought about her. Well, it was from that time that it all started. I naturally took immediate steps to find out what could be found out about her in an indirect way. And I waited for her next visit with a particular impatience, for I had a premonition that she would come soon. When she did come, I entered into a very amiable conversation with her, doing my utmost to be as civil to her as possible. I have had quite a good education, you see, and my manners are irreproachable. Well, it was then that I realized that she was good and gentle. Good and gentle creatures do not offer a very stiff resistance, not for long anyway, and though they may not open their hearts to you altogether, they don't know how to steer clear of a conversation. They reply in monosyllables, but they do reply. And the further they get drawn into it, the more talkative they become, and so long, that is, as you don't get tired of it yourself. So long as you want to make the most of your opportunity. I need to hardly tell you that she did not explain everything or anything to me at the time. It was afterwards that I found out about the voice and everything else. She was just then advertising wildly, first of course in a rather high and mighty fashion, a governess ready to take a situation in the country. Please reply about conditions of employment by post. But later it was, willing to accept anything, to give lessons and to be a companion, to look after the household, to act as a nurse to a sick lady, plain sewing, and so on and so forth. The usual thing. All this, of course, was put in for publication at different times and in different versions. But in the end, when things got really desperate, it was even without salary in return for board. But nothing doing. She could not find herself a job. It was then that I made up my mind to put her to the test for the last time. I suddenly picked up the last issue of The Voice and showed her an advertisement. A young lady orphan looking for situation as governess to young children, preferably with an elderly widower, willing to help with household duties. You see, this advertisement appeared this morning, and I'm ready to bet you anything she'll have a job before the evening. That's the way to advertise. Again, she flushed. Again, her eyes blazed. She turned around and went out at once. That pleased me very much. However, at that time, I was already sure of everything and had no longer any fear. No one, you see, would take her cigar holders, and besides, she had no more cigar holders to pawn. Well, I was right. 2 days later, she called again, looking very pale and agitated. I realized that she must have had some trouble at home, and so it was. I'll explain presently what the trouble was. At the moment, I just want to mention how I suddenly impressed her, and how I rose in her estimation. It was a sort of scheme I suddenly conceived, you see. As a matter of fact, she brought this icon, and made up her mind at last to bring it. Now, listen, please, listen. It was just then that everything began. I'm afraid I've been a bit muddled till now. You see, I'm trying to recall all this, every detail, every little thing. I'm trying all the time to gather my thoughts to a point. But somehow I can't do it, and all these little details count. All these little details are frightfully important. An icon of the Virgin with a babe, a family icon, an ancient one, the embossed metal of silver gilt, worth, well, shall we say 6 rubles at most. I could see that the icon was precious to her. She was pawning it, you see, without removing the embossed metal. Why don't you take off the metal setting and take the icon back with you? I said. For after all, it's an icon. It's hardly what you might call the done thing to pawn an icon, is it? Why not? Aren't you allowed to take it? Oh yes, I can take it all right, but don't you think you may perhaps yourself? All right, take it off if you like. Well, I'll tell you what, I said, thinking it over. I shan't take it off, but I'll put it here together with the other icons in the icon case under the lamp. I always had a lamp burning above the icons ever since the day I first opened my pawn shop. And I'll give you 10 rubles for it. I don't want 10. 5 will be quite enough for me. I'll most certainly redeem it. Are you sure you won't take 10? The icon is worth it, you know, I said, noticing that her eyes flashed again. She made no answer. I went into the other room and came back with 5 rubles for her. Don't despise anyone, I said. I was once in such straits myself, perhaps even in worse straits, and if you see me now engaged in this sort of business, after all what I've been through. You don't mean you're avenging yourself on society, do you? Is that it? She interrupted suddenly with rather a caustic smile, which was quite innocent, though. It was a general sort of smile, for at that time she made no distinction whatever between me and anyone else, so that she had said it almost without offense. Ah, thought I. So that's the sort of person you are, showing your claws, my pretty one. I shouldn't wonder if you are not a member of one of the new movements. You see, I said at once, half jokingly, half mysteriously, I am part of that power which still doeth good, though scheming ill. She shot a glance at me, a glance that betrayed a great deal of interest, though I suppose there was quite a lot of childish curiosity in it too. Wait, what kind of an idea is that? Where is it from? I believe I've heard it somewhere. Don't rack your brains, it's in these words that Mephistopheles introduces himself to Faust. You've read Faust, haven't you? No, not really. You mean you haven't read it at all, don't you? You ought to read it. However, I can see that sardonic smile on your lips again. Please don't imagine I've so little good taste as to wish to disguise my part as pawnbroker by introducing myself to you as a sort of Mephistopheles. Once a pawnbroker, always a pawnbroker. I know. You're so strange. I never dreamt of saying anything of the kind to you. What she really meant to say was, I never expected you to be an educated man. But she didn't say it, though I knew she thought it. I had pleased her enormously. You see, I observed, one can do good in any profession. I'm not, of course, referring to myself. I'm quite ready to admit that I do nothing but evil, yet. Of course, one can do good in any business, she said, with a quick but keen glance at me. Yes, in any business, she suddenly added. Oh, I remember it all. I remember all those moments, and I'd like to add here that when these young people, these dear young people, want to say something clever and profound, they betray it suddenly and rather too openly and naively by a look on their faces. See? I'm saying something clever and profound to you. And not out of vanity either. Like people of my age, who could see how she herself valued it so enormously, believed in it, esteemed it so highly, and was dead certain that you too esteemed it as highly as she did. Oh, how important sincerity is. It is their sincerity that assures them their victory. And in her this was so delightful. Yes, I remember it all. I've forgotten nothing. As soon as she was gone, I made up my mind. The same day I went out to make my last inquiries and found out all the latest details about her present circumstances. I knew every detail of her past from Lucaria, who was their maid at the time and who had been in my pay for some time. These details were so terrible that I don't know how she could have laughed as she did the other day, or I've been so curious about the words of Mephistopheles that when she herself was in such a dreadful position. But youth! Yes, that is just what I thought about her at the time with pride and joy. For there is magnanimity. Yeah, magnanimity there too. Though I may be standing on the very brink of a precipice, Goethe's grand words still shed a radiance. Youth is always magnanimous, though only a little bit, though wrong-headedly. I mean, it's about her I'm thinking, and about her alone. And above all, even at that time, I already regarded her as mine, and not for one moment did I doubt my own power. It's one of the most voluptuous thoughts in the world, you know, not to be in doubt, I mean. But what's the matter with me? If I go on like this, I shall never be able to gather everything to a point. Quick, quick! Oh God, that's not it at all. That's not it at all. 2. A proposal of marriage. The details I found out about her I can explain in a few words. Her father and mother were dead. They had died 3 years before I met her, and she had been left with her disreputable aunts, though disreputable is hardly the right word for them. One aunt was a widow, a mother of a large family, 6 children, all close to one another in age. Her other aunt was an old maid, as bad as they make 'em. Both were bad. Her father had been a civil servant, a clerk in a government office, a non-hereditary nobleman. In short, everything was in my favor. I appeared as though from a higher world. After all, I'm a retired first lieutenant of a famous regiment. A nobleman by birth, independent, etc. As for my pawn shop and my money-lending business, the aunts could only have looked upon it with respect. She had been slaving for her aunts for 3 years, but in spite of what she seemed to have found time to pass her school exams somewhere, passed them by hook or by crook, passed them for all her daily drudgery. And that after all meant something, if only as showing her desire to achieve something higher and nobler. Why, what did I want to get married for? However, to blazes with me, I'll discuss that later. Besides, that isn't the point, really. Anyway, she taught her aunt's children, made their underclothing for them, and in the end not only made their underclothing for them, but scrubbed the floors as well. And that with her weak chest, too. Why not? Why? Not to put too fine a print on it. They even beat her. Begrudged her every bite of bread she ate, and they ended up by intending to sell her. Damn 'em. Leave out the sordid details. She told me all about it afterwards. A whole year the fat shopkeeper next door had been watching it all. Not an ordinary shopkeeper either, owned 2 grocery shops. He had already driven 2 wives into their graves, and as he was now looking for a 3rd one, he cast his eyes on her. A quiet one, he thought. Brought up in poverty, and I am marrying her for the sake of my motherless children. And he had children all right, so he opened up negotiations with her aunts, asking for the girl's hand in marriage. He was 50. Of course, she was horrified. It was then that she began coming to me to get money to pay for the advertisements in The Voice. At last she began imploring her aunts to give her a little time to think it over. Just a little time. They gave her a little time, only a very little time, not a minute more. Made her life a hell on earth. We don't know how to fill our own bellies without an extra mouth to feed. I knew all about it, and after her visit in the morning that day, made up my mind finally. That evening the shopkeeper came to see them. Brought her a pound of sweets from his shop worth $1. While she was entertaining him, I called Lucaria out of the kitchen and told her to go and whisper to her that I was waiting for her at the gate and wanted to see her on a very urgent matter. I felt very pleased with myself. As a matter of fact, I was tremendously pleased with myself all that day. It was at the gates and in the presence of Lucaria that I told her, thunderstruck as she was at having been sent for by me, that I should be happy and honored if I begged her not to be surprised at the manner of my proposal, nor that I was proposing to her in the street. I'm a blunt man, I said, and it's unnecessary for me to tell you that I know all about your circumstances. And I was not lying, I'm a blunt man anyway. What does it matter? I spoke to her not only decently, that is to say, showing that I was a man of education, but also with originality, and that's what matters. Well, is there any harm in admitting it? I wanted to judge myself, and I am judging myself. I must speak pro and contra, and I do. I always remembered it with pleasure afterwards, though it may have been silly. I told her frankly at the time without the slightest embarrassment that in the first place, I was not particularly talented or particularly clever and perhaps not even particularly good. I told her that I was a pretty cheap egoist. I remember that expression. I had thought of it on the way and was rather pleased with it. And that it was indeed very likely that I possessed a number of other highly unpleasant qualities. I told her all that with a special sort of pride. We all know how one talks of such things, mind you. I had enough good sense not to speak of my virtues after having so nobly enlarged on my bad qualities. I did not say But to make up for that, I possess this or that, or the other virtue. I saw that for the time being she was terribly frightened, but I didn't tone anything down either. On the contrary, seeing how frightened she was, I deliberately painted everything in blacker colors. I told her bluntly that she would not have to worry about food, but as for fine clothes, theaters, and balls, she couldn't count on that. Not at first, at all events. Later on, when I attained my object, possibly. This stern tone most decidedly appealed to me. I added, though, and that casually too, that if I was engaged in that sort of business, that is, kept my pawn shop, it was because of a certain object I had in mind, because that is, there was a certain circumstance. But surely I had a right to talk like that, for I really had such an object in mind. There really was such a circumstance. One moment, ladies and gentlemen, one moment, please. I always hated this money-lending business. I hated it all my life, and as a matter of fact, though I admit it's absurd to talk about oneself in such mysterious phrases, I was revenging myself on society. Indeed, I was. So that her guide that morning about revenging myself was unfair. I mean, if I had told her straight, yes, I'm revenging myself on society, and she had burst out laughing as she nearly did that morning, the whole thing would indeed have appeared rather ridiculous. But by the use of an indirect hint, by a mysterious phrase, one can, it seems, bias the imagination in one's favor. Besides, at the time I was no longer afraid of anything. For I knew very well that the fat shopkeeper at any rate was more hateful to her than I, and that when I made my proposal to her at the gate I would appear as a deliverer to her. I knew that. Oh, a man knows a dirty trick when he sees one. But was it a dirty trick? How is one to pass judgment on a man? Didn't I already love her even then? Wait a bit. At that time, of course, I never said anything about conferring a favor upon her. On the contrary. Oh, quite on the contrary. It is you, I said, who are conferring a favor on me, and not I on you. So that, as you see, I even put it into words. I couldn't restrain myself, and I dare say it must have sounded rather silly, for I noticed a fleeting expression of dismay on her face. But on the whole, I most certainly got the better of it. Wait, though, if we must all recall, if we must recall all this sordid business, then let me recall that last bit of beastliness too. As I stood there, the thought that was stirring in my mind was, you are tall, well-built, educated, and, after all, without boasting about it, not bad-looking either. That's what kept recurring to my mind at the time. Well, anyway. She of course said yes to me right away at the gate, but perhaps it is only fair to add that out there at the gate she thought a very long time before she said yes. She pondered so long that I could not refrain from asking, well, what do you say? And I even put the question to her, with a certain air of gallantry. Well, what do you say, madam? Please wait, let me think. And her sweet little face looked so serious that even then I might have read it, but I felt hurt. Why, I thought, is she really choosing between me and that shopkeeper? Oh, I did not understand then. I did not understand anything. No, I didn't understand anything then. I didn't understand till today. I remember Lucaria ran after me as I was going away, stopped me on the street and said, speaking very fast, God will reward you, sir, for marrying our dear young lady. Only please don't tell her that, sir. She's proud. Proud, is she? Well, I thought. I like them proud. Proud women are particularly good when, well, when you're no longer in doubt about your power over them, eh? Oh, base, blundering man, oh, how pleased I was. Do you know, while she was standing there by the gate, pondering whether to say yes to me, and I was wondering why she was taking such a long time over it, do you know what? Do you know that she may have even had some thought as this? If it means unhappiness for me either way, then why not choose the worst? Why not choose the fat shopkeeper and have done with it? For he would be quite sure to beat me to death in one of his drunken fits. Eh, what do you think? Might not such a thought have occurred to her at the time? No, I don't understand it even now. I don't understand anything, even now. I've just said that the thought might have occurred to her, but why not choose the worst of the two evils, that is, the shopkeeper? Which was the worst for her at the moment, the shopkeeper or I? The shopkeeper or a pawnbroker who quotes goeth? That's the question. What question? Why, don't you see? Even that. The answer's lying on the table, and you say it's a question. But to hell with me, I'm of no consequence. Besides, what does it matter to me now whether I'm or whether I am not of consequence? That I am afraid is something I cannot possibly tell. I had better go to bed. My head aches. Are we supposed to root for this guy? No. No, we're not. I highly doubt we were intended to root for this guy. I highly doubt we were intended to root for this guy. we're probably supposed to deeply see into his psyche and at first make the judgment that we are making now, probably implicitly. And I say we because, you know, I think it's most of us here, that, okay, this guy is horrible. This guy is absolute trash, exactly. But then I think throughout the rest of the short story, I think what would be more interesting is then like the way he handles the suicide might change the way he feels about everything, and we might see him like kind of his headspace kind of shift, and hope that if a person like this did exist, it wouldn't take the death of someone like this, or the tragedy of something like this, to change their minds. Is what I think the story's direction is going, but we'll see. Part 3. The noblest of men. But I don't believe it myself. I couldn't sleep, and how could I with that pulse throbbing in my head? I wanted to get to the bottom of it. At the bottom of all that filth. Oh, the filth. Oh, what filth I had dragged her out of then. Surely she ought to have realized that. She ought to have appreciated my actions. Other thoughts, too, pleased me at the time. For instance, that I was 41 and she was only 16. Sorry. That fascinated me. That feeling of inequality. Yes, it's delightful. Very delightful. Now, for example, I wanted to have our wedding a la Anglaise. That is a quiet wedding, just the two of us, and of course the two witnesses, one of whom would be Lucaria, and then straight to the train, say to Moscow. I had incidentally some business there, staying at a hotel for a fortnight or two. But she was against it. She would not hear of it, and so I was forced to pay visits to her aunts and to present my respects to them as the relations from whom I was taking her. Yes, I gave in, and the proper respect was paid to the aunts. I even made a present to the creatures of 100 rubles each, and promised them more without of course telling her anything about it, so as to not distress her by the meanness of the whole situation. Her aunts at once became as smooth as silk. There was also some argument about her trousseau. She had nothing in the world, literally nothing, but then she didn't want anything. I succeeded, however, in persuading her that it was not right and proper for a bride not to have anything at all, and I got her the trousseau. For who else was there to do anything for her? Well, anyway, to hell with me. Still, I did convey certain of my ideas to her then, so that she should at all events know. I was perhaps a thought too hasty about it. The important thing was that from the very start, however much she tried to restrain herself, she did very best to show her affection for me. Met me whenever I came to visit them in the evening with protestations of delight. Told me in that chatter of hers, the sweet chatter of innocence, about the days of her childhood, her babyhood, her old home, her mother and father, but I never hesitated for a moment and poured cold water upon all her raptures. That was essentially what my idea amounted to. To her transports I replied with silence, benevolent silence, no doubt, but all the same, as she soon realized that we were different and that I was an enigma. And it was the enigma that was my trump card, for to create this enigma for the sake of it, I perpetrated all this folly. Sternness above all, and it was with the sternness that I led her into my house. To put the whole thing in a nutshell, though, I was eminently pleased at the time. I created a whole system. Oh, it came naturally enough without the slightest effort on my part. Besides, it couldn't have been otherwise. I had to create the system owing to one unavoidable circumstance. Why, indeed, should I be slandering myself? The system was perfect. A real system. No, listen, if you want to pass judgment on a man, you must first know all the facts about him. Listen. Oh, Azure has to go. Have a good time. Pawnbroker is an interesting job for a character. Pretty neat tragedy. Pretty near tragedy. Yeah, so I've never really thought about pawnbrokers before. I don't know why. I just don't think I have given serious thought. I knew like what a pawnbroker was and that they existed. I just didn't think about them very much. And the story is making me revisit a concept that I probably, the last I thought was like years and years and years ago. So this is quite fascinating to me already. Yeah, the job is part of his character. Now, listen. How shall I begin? For the whole thing is very complicated. Whenever you start justifying yourself, things become complicated. You see, young people as a rule despise money, so I at once made a special point of money. I laid particular stress on money, and I did it with such consummate skill that she grew more and more silent. She would open her large eyes, listen to me, and look at me, and fall silent. You are... Sorry, I lost... I had a heavy blink and I lost where I was. I'm so sorry. Where was I? Okay. She would open her large eyes, listen to me, look at me, and fall silent. You see, young people are generous. I mean, young people who are good are generous and impulsive, but they have little tolerance. If anything doesn't turn out the way they like, they immediately begin to despise you. And I liked her to take a tolerant view of things. I wanted to instill the idea of tolerance into her mind. I wanted her to accept that idea with all her heart and soul. That was my plan, wasn't it? Let me give you a trivial example. How do you think I should have explained this money-lending business of mine to a girl of such character? Naturally, I did not speak of it directly, for if I did, it would have appeared that I was apologizing to her for my pawn shop. Well, in the end, I did it as it were through pride. I spoke almost without words, and I am an old hand at speaking without words. I've spent all my life speaking without words. I've lived through whole tragedies without uttering a word. Oh, I too had been unhappy. I was cast out by the whole world, cast out and forgotten, and no one knows it. And all of a sudden, this 16-year-old girl collected a whole dossier of the most detailed information about me from all sorts of scoundrels, and she thought she knew everything, while the innermost mystery remained buried in the breast of this man. I went on being silent. Yes, I went on being silent, especially with her, until yesterday. Why was I silent? Well, because I am a proud man. I meant her to find out for herself without my help, and not from the tales told by all sorts of scoundrels. I wanted her to discover by herself this man and understand him. When I took her to my house, I expected the fullest possible respect from her. I wanted her to stand in homage for me because of my sufferings, and I deserved it. Oh, I was always proud. I always wanted all or nothing, and it is just because I never compromise where my own happiness is concerned, just because I wanted everything, that I was forced to act as I did that time. Find out for yourself, I as much as told her, and learn to appreciate me. For you must admit that if I had started explaining everything to her myself, if I had prompted her, if I had humbled myself before her, if I had begged her to respect me, it would have been the same as if I had begged her for charity. However, why am I talking about this? It's so silly. I explained to her in few words, without beating about the bush, brutally. I stressed the brutality of it, that nothing in the world was more delightful than the generosity of youth, but it wasn't worth a farthing. Why not? Because it costs them nothing, because it is merely the result of their inexperience, because all that, as it were, is nothing but the first impressions of life. But I said, let's see the sort of people you'll be if you have to work for a living, if you have to work hard for a living. Cheap generosity is always easy, even to give one's life. Yes, even that is easy, because it is merely the result of high spirits, of a superabundance of energy, of a passionate desire for beauty. Oh no, you try a different kind of generosity, the real heroic kind, the difficult, calm, silent kind, without glitter, the odium, the kind that demands great sacrifices, the kind that doesn't bring you a scrap of fame or glory, in which you, a man of shining virtue, are exhibited before the whole world as a blackguard, while you are really the most honest man of them all. Well, try that, my dear girl, just try it. Try and see what sort of hero you'll prove yourself to be. But no, ma'am, I can see that you don't want that sort of heroism, while I had done nothing in my life but bear that cross. First, she argued. Good Lord, how she argued. Then she began lapsing into silence. Wouldn't say a word, only opened her eyes as she listened to me, opened them wide. Those big eyes of hers, those observant eyes of hers, and in addition, I suddenly saw a smile on her face, a mistrustful, silent, evil smile. Well, it was with that smile that I brought her into my house. It was true, of course, that she had nowhere else to go. He sounds a bit of a narcissist. Oh, I wouldn't say a bit. I would say that's putting it lightly. I mean, this is his internal monologue, bear in mind, this is him, the story begins with the death of the girl, and he's trying to make sense of it to himself. He's trying to explain it to himself, right? And the fact that while he's doing that, he's still like, but I didn't do anything wrong, this is this is, in fact, I was such a great person, is very much, intended for that effect. I mean, it's one of those, you feel sorry and scared for this girl. I do too, but it's also because of the way the story is framed, with you seeing the tragedy of it right at the beginning, and everything from henceforth being told from the man's perspective. I think offers an interesting dynamic that's like, just, okay, I roughly know that this doesn't end well, but how come I still have this weird hope in me as I'm reading through it that like it all works out fine. I know it doesn't. Which I think also helps transport you into the mind of the character. Something I would imagine Dostoyevsky does a lot. Forgot, there was a comment earlier that was like, Dostoyevsky's characters are just trying to out horrible each other, and that sounds about right to me. I've never read anything else from Dostoyevsky, but that sounds about right. All right. Chapter 4. Part 4. Chapter 4, probably. Plans, plans, plans. Which of us began it first? Why, neither. It all began of itself from the very start. I have said that I brought her to my house with sternness. However, from the very beginning I made things easy for her. I took pains to explain to her while we were still engaged that she would have to help me with taking the pledges and paying out money. Well, at the time she said nothing. Mark that, please. And moreover, she actually began helping me in my business with great enthusiasm. Mind you, my flat, my furniture, everything in fact remained as before. My flat consists of 2 rooms, one large reception room with the pawn shop partitioned off, and the second room, also large, was our own room, our sitting room and bedroom. My furniture is rather poor, even her aunt's had better furniture. My icon case with the lamp is in the reception room where the pawn shop is. In my own room I have a bookcase with a few books and a small trunk. I always keep the keys of the trunk. Then there is, of course, the bed, tables, chairs. I told her before we were married and that I'd let her have 1 ruble a day for our board, that is, for food for herself, me, and Lucaria, whom I'd enticed away from her aunt. 1 ruble a day and no more. I must have 30,000 in 3 years, I said, and there is no other way of saving it up. She raised no objections to that, but I myself increased her daily allowance by 30 kopecks. The same thing with the theatre. I told her before our marriage that she didn't expect to be taken to the theatre. However, I decided to take her to a play once a month, and decently too, to the stalls. We went together. We went 3 times, as a matter of fact. Saw The Chase After Happiness and Singing Birds, I think. Oh, to hell with it. We went there in silence, and we came back in silence. Why, oh why, did we from the very beginning make no attempt to speak to each other? At first, there were no quarrels, but just silence. In those days, I remember that she always used to watch me furtively. As soon as I noticed that, I became more silent than ever. It is true, it was I who made a point of keeping silent, and not she. On her part, there were 1 or 2 outbursts of affection when she would rush to embrace me. But as these outbursts were quite obviously morbid and hysterical, and as what I wanted was secure happiness with respect from her, I received them coldly. And I was quite right. We always had a quarrel the day after such an outburst. But perhaps I am being a little unfair. There were no real quarrels, only silence and more and more insolent looks from her. Rebellion and independence, that's what it was. Only she wasn't very good at it. Yes, that gentle face was getting more and more insolent. Believe it or not, I was becoming loathsome to her. Oh yes, I know what I'm talking about. I observed it carefully. You see, the fact that those outbursts of hers were the result of strained nerves was quite undeniable. Why else would she, after emerging from that squalor and destitution, after scrubbing floors, begin sniffing at our poverty? As a matter of fact, there was no question of poverty at all. It was just economy. I never stinted myself in what was necessary. In linen, for instance, and cleanliness. I've always been of the opinion that cleanliness in husbands attracts a wife. Still, it was not poverty she found fault with so much as with my so-called meanness in economizing. There's some purpose behind it, she seemed to say, wants to show off his strength of his character. She herself quite suddenly refused to go to the theatre, and that scornful smile of hers was to be seen more and more often on her face. And I grew more and more silent, more and more silent. Only heard the name Fyodor Dostoyevsky from Bunga Stray Dogs. We all have to start somewhere. We all have to start somewhere. And let me tell you, this is also my first Dostoyevsky text, okay? So we're all equally uneducated here. But anyways. I wasn't going to justify myself, was I? You see, it was the pawn shop that was the chief source of trouble between us. Mind you, I knew that a woman, and particularly a girl of 16, simply must submit to her husband. Women have no originality. That is axiomatic. Yes, I regard it as axiomatic even now. Even now. Never mind what's lying there in the sitting room. Truth is truth, and John Stuart Mill himself can do nothing about it. And a woman who loves, will worship even vice. The crimes even of the man she loves. He would himself never invent such justifications for his crimes, and she will find for them. That is generous, but it is not original. It is the lack of originality that has been the ruin of women. And what, I repeat, are you pointing at the table in the sitting room for? Is that original? Is what's lying there on the table original? Aha! Listen. I was quite certain of her love then. After all, she did fling herself on my neck even at the time. That proves that she loved, or at all events wanted to love. Yes, that's what it was. She wanted to love. She did her best to love, and the point is that there were no crimes there for which she might have had to find a justification. You say, a pawnbroker, and everyone else says the same. But what if I am a pawnbroker? I mean, there must have been some reason for one of the most generous of men to have become a pawnbroker. You see, there are ideas. I mean, if one were to put some ideas into words, say them out loud, they would sound very silly. Why? I'd be ashamed of doing it myself. And why? For no reason at all. Just because we are all rotters and can't bear the truth. At all events, I know of no other reason. I said just now, one of the most generous of men. It may sound ridiculous, and yet that is how it was. It is the truth. It's the truth and nothing but the truth. Yes, I had a right to want to make myself secure at the time. I had a right to open the pawn shop. You have rejected me. You, the people, have cast me out with contemptuous silence. For my passionate desire to love you, you have repaid me with a wrong from the consequences of which I shall suffer all my life. Now I have the right to erect a wall against you, to save up 30,000 rubles and spend the rest of my life somewhere in the Crimea. On the south coast, among the mountains and vineyards, on my own estate, bought with a 30,000, and above all, far away from you all, with malice against none, with the woman I love at my side, with a family, if God will send me one, and being an help to them that dwell in the country round about. Well, of course, it doesn't matter if I'm saying this to myself now, but at the time, what could have been more stupid than making a long story to her about it? That was the reason for my proud silence. That was why we sat together in silence, for what could she have made of it at all? She was only 16, a girl in her teens. What could she have made of my justifications and sufferings when I had to deal with was a straight-laced, uncompromising attitude, ignorance of life, the cheap convictions of youth, the utter blindness of a noble soul, and above all, the pawn shop. Good God, the pawn shop. The pawn shop! And was I a villain in the pawn shop? Did she not see how I treated people? Did I ever take more than was my due? Oh, how awful truth is in the world. That exquisite creature, that gentle creature, that heavenly creature was a tyrant. She was the pitiless tyrant and torturer of my soul. I must say it. I shouldn't be fair to myself if I didn't. Do you think I did not love her? Who can honestly say I didn't love her? Don't you see? That was the irony of it, the terrible irony of fate and nature. We are accursed. The life of people, and mine in particular, is accursed. For I can see now that I must have made some mistake. That something went wrong somewhere. Everything was so clear. My plan was as clear as daylight. Stern, proud, is in need of no moral consolations from anyone, suffers in silence, and that was true. I was not lying. She will see herself later on that it was generosity on my part, though now she cannot see it. And when she does realize it one day, she will appreciate me 10 times as much, and she will fall in the dust at my feet, her hands folded in supplication. That was my plan. There was something I forgot or failed to see. There was something I mismanaged badly. But enough, enough. Whose forgiveness am I to ask now? What is done is done. Be brave, man, and proud. It is not your fault. Well, why should I not tell the truth? Why should I be afraid to face the truth squarely? It was her fault. Her fault. She was nice to me, it must be an evil power play. Delusional pawnbroker. I mean, the sentiment is more common than one would like it to be. Pawnbroker would still fit right in today. His view of gender roles. Well, yeah. I would say I would like to supplement that he would fit right in if he thought these things that didn't go out and about like saying him. If he just thought them silently, he would fit right in, yes. We will never leave his misogynist incel arc. I will also say that, again, and I don't know why I'm defending this guy. This guy's like a horrible. This guy's horrible. He's literally a pawnbroker in like a Dostoyevsky novel. I don't think anyone is expected to like the character, but also at the same time, what's more interesting to me is like that this is the norm. Like we obviously at the time, even at the time of writing, I would assume like readers of Dostoyevsky would see that and go, okay, that's not quite right. But it would also like it's not an otherworldly like evil. This is just kind of like, oh, the people are just like this. He would be a relationship grifter guru. Oh, would he be? He would be a grifter for sure. I don't know if he would be a relationship grifter. Maybe he could. He could definitely do it. Yes. You did oversleep. Welcome. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the stream. You didn't miss too much. We just went through about 4 chapters. Don't worry, you didn't miss that much. I suppose if I were to catch you up, we're reading A Gentle Creature by Dostoyevsky. So this man is justifying the death of his wife. And we see how this whole thing unfolds in his mind, or at least in his memory, as he tries to recall what happened. And so far he's very much like, it's not my fault that she killed herself. It's clearly her fault. I was the greatest man of all time, and I was so generous and humble and nice and educated. And you know, when people say they're smart, when people feel the need to constantly like say that they are nice or say that they're smart, you know what that means. I don't have to tell you. Anyways. Chapter 5. The Gentle Creature Rebels. Our quarrels began as a result of her sudden decision to issue loans for any amount she pleased. On 2 occasions, she presumed to start an argument with me on this very subject. I told her I could not allow it, and then the captain's widow turned up. The old woman brought a locket, a present from her late husband, the usual thing, a keepsake. I gave her 30 rubles. She started wailing plaintively, asking me to be sure not to lose the thing. I naturally told her not to worry, it would be safe. Well, anyway, 5 days later, she came again to exchange it for a bracelet that was not worth 8 rubles. I quite naturally refused, but I suppose she must have read something in my wife's eyes, for she came back later when I was out, and my wife exchanged the medallion for her bracelet. Having learnt about it the same day, I spoke to her gently, but firmly and sensibly. She was sitting on the bed, her eyes fixed on the floor, tapping with the toe of her right boot on the carpet, a habit of hers. An ugly smile played on her lips. Then, without raising my voice, I told her quietly that the money was mine, and that I had a right to look on life with my own eyes, and that when I had asked her to become my wife, I had concealed nothing from her. All of a sudden, she jumped up. All of a sudden, she began shaking all over, and all of a sudden, what do you think? She stamped her foot at me. She was a wild beast. She was in a rage. A wild beast in a rage. I was petrified with amazement. I'd never expected her to behave like that, but never for a moment did I lose control of myself. Never by a moment did I betray my astonishment. Again, in the same quiet voice, I told her, straight from now on, I would not allow her to meddle in my affairs. She laughed in my face and walked out of the flat. You're gonna make the gentle creature joke. That's not what this is at all. Yeah, this is like horrible. This is horrible, man. Okay, sorry. Back to the reading. Now you see, the point is that she had no right to walk out of the flat. She was to go nowhere without me. That was our understanding before our marriage. She came back in the evening. I never said a word. Next day, 2. She went out in the morning. The day after again, I closed my pawn shop and went to see her aunts. I'd broken off all relations with them after our wedding. I did not want them to call on us, and we did not call on them. But it seemed she had not been there. They listened to me with great interest and then laughed in my face. Serves you right, they said. I expected them to laugh at me. Anyway, I had once bribed the younger aunt, the old maid, with 100 rubles, giving her 25 in advance. 2 days later, she came to see me. An army officer is mixed up in this, she said. A lieutenant by the name of Yefimovic, a former regimental colleague of yours. I was very much astonished. That Yefimovic had done me more harm than anyone in the regiment. About a month ago, lacking all sense of shame, he had come to my pawn shop once or twice on the pretext of pawning something, and I remember began laughing at my wife, with my wife. I went up to him at once and told him not to dare show his face in my house again in view of what our relations had been, but I had no idea that there was anything between him and my wife. I simply thought that it was just his confounded cheek. But now the aunt informed me that she had already made an appointment to meet him, and that the moving spirit behind the whole affair was a former acquaintance of theirs, Julia Semyonovna, a widow and a colonel's wife to boot. It is her your wife goes to see, the aunt told me. I shall be brief about this affair. Although it cost me about 300 rubles, when in a couple of days everything was arranged. I was to be in an adjoining room behind closed doors and overhear the first rendezvous between my wife and Yefimovic. In expectation of this, on the day before, there occurred between us a brief but for me significant scene. She came back late in the afternoon, sat down on the bed and looked at me sardonically, tapping the carpet with her foot. As I looked at her, the idea suddenly flashed through my head that for the whole of the last month, or rather the last fortnight, she had not been acting in character. Or one ought perhaps to say she was acting out of character. I saw before me a creature of a violent, aggressive nature. I don't want to say shameless, but disreputable. One that seemed to be looking for trouble. Yes, asking for it. Her gentleness, however, seemed to be in her way. When such a woman gives way to violence, however she may overdo things, she cannot conceal the fact that she is behaving against her better nature, that she is egging herself on, that she is quite unable to overcome her own feelings of shame, and her own outraged sense of decency. It is because of this that such women sometimes behave so outrageously that you can hardly believe your eyes. A woman accustomed to a life of immorality will, on the contrary, always try to tone everything down. She will make everything 100 times more disgusting, but all under the pretense of decorum and decency, a pretense that in itself is a sort of claim of superiority over you. Is it true that you were turned out of this regiment because you were afraid to fight a duel? She asked suddenly, without rhyme or reason, and her eyes flashed. It's quite true. Following a decision of my fellow officers, I was asked to leave the regiment, though as a matter of fact I had sent in my resignation before that. They expelled you for being a coward, did they? Yes, they sentenced me as a coward. I refused to fight this duel not because I was a coward, but because I would not submit to their tyrannical decision and send a challenge to someone when I did not consider myself to be insulted. You ought to know. I could not resist the temptation to proceed, that to take action against tyranny in spite of all the consequences it might entail meant showing more pluck than fighting any kind of duel. I'm afraid I could not restrain myself. By the last phrase I tried, as if it were, to justify myself, and that's what she was waiting for. She wanted this new proof of my humiliation. She laughed maliciously. And is it true that for 3 years afterwards you wandered about the streets of Petersburg like a tramp, begging for coppers and sleeping under billiard tables? Yes, it's quite true. I slept in the markets and in Vyazemsky's doss house. Quite true. There was a lot of disgrace and degradation in my life after my expulsion from the regiment, but not moral degradation. For even at the time I was the first to hate my own actions. It was only a degradation of my will and mind, and was only caused by the desperateness of my position. But all that is over now. Oh no, you're a man of importance, a financier. A hint at my pawn shop, you see, but by then I had already succeeded in taking a firm hold of myself. I saw what she wanted most was explanations that would be humiliating to me, and I did not give them. Besides, just then the doorbell rang and I went out into the large room to attend to a client. Afterwards, an hour later, when she suddenly put on her things to go out, she stopped in front of me and said, "You didn't tell me anything about her before we married, did you?" I made no answer and she went away. So next day I was standing in that room behind the closed doors, listening to hear how my fate was being decided. I had a gun in my pocket. She had dressed up for the occasion and she was sitting at the table while Yefimovic played the fool before her. And what do you think? The result was, I'd say it to my credit, the result turned out to be just as I had anticipated, though at the time I might not have realized that I did expect it. I don't know whether I am expressing myself clearly. This is what happened. I listened for a whole hour, and for a whole hour I was present at a battle of wits between a woman, a most honorable and high-principled woman, and a man about town with no principles, a dissolute and dull creature with a cringing, groveling soul. And how, thought I, lost in amazement, how does this innocent, this gentle, this reserved woman know it all? The most witty author of a comedy of manners could not have devised this scene of ridicule, most innocent laughter and sacred contempt of virtue for vice. And how scintillating were her words and sly digs, what wit in her quick repartees, what withering truth in her condemnation. And at the same time, what almost girlish artlessness. She laughed in his face about his protestations of love, at his gestures, at his proposals. Having arrived with his mind made up to take her crudely by storm and without expecting to meet with any serious opposition, the bubble of his conceit was suddenly pricked. At first, I might have thought that she was flirting with him. The flirtation of a witty, though vicious creature to enhance her own value, but no, I was mistaken. Truth shone forth like the sun, and there was no room left for doubt in my mind. She, who had so little experience of the world, could have made up her mind to keep the appointment only out of hatred for me, an impulsive and insincere hatred, but as soon as matters came to a head, her eyes were opened at once. It was simply the case of a woman who was trying her hardest to humiliate me, but having made up her mind to stoop so low, she could not bear the horrible disgrace of it. And how indeed could Yefimovitch or any other society rake hope to seduce a woman like her, a woman so pure and innocent, a woman who had such an unquenchable faith in her ideals? On the contrary, he merely aroused laughter. The whole truth rose up from her soul, and her indignation evoked sarcasm from her heart. I repeat, in the end the damned fool looked utterly dumbfounded. He sat there frowning, hardly replying to her, so that I was even beginning to fear that he might go so far as to insult her out of a mean desire for revenge. And I repeat again, to my credit be it said that I listened to the scene almost without surprise. It was as though I had come across something I had known all my life. It was as though I had gone there on purpose to meet it. I went there without believing anything against her, without making any accusations against her, though I did have a gun in my pocket. That is the truth. And how could I have imagined her to be different? Why else did I marry her? Oh, it's true enough, I knew perfectly well at the time how she hated me. But I was also convinced that she was guiltless. I brought the scene to a sudden close by opening the door. Yefimovitch jumped to his feet. I took her by the hand and asked her to leave the house with me. Yefimovitch recovered himself and burst into loud peals of laughter. "Oh," he said, "I've certainly nothing against the sacred rite of holy matrimony. Take her away, and you know," he shouted after me, "though a decent man would think twice before fighting a duel with you, I feel that out of respect for your lady I ought to tell you that I'm at your service, if, that is, you'd care to run the risk." "Do you hear?" I said, stopping her for a second on the threshold, then not another word all the way home. I led her by the arm, and she offered no resistance. On the contrary, she was too bewildered, too much taken by surprise by all that had happened, but that only lasted until we got home. Once at home, she sat down and stared at me. She was very pale, and though when she sat down there might have been a sardonic smile on her lips, she regarded me a moment later with a solemn and grim challenge in her eyes, and I believe that at first she was quite convinced that I would kill her with a gun. But I took it silently out of my pocket and laid it on the table. She looked at me and the gun. Not that she knew all about the gun. I had acquired it and kept it always loaded ever since I had opened my pawn shop. But when I opened my pawn shop, I made up my mind that I would not keep huge dogs or employ a strongman servant as Moser does, for instance. My cook opens the door to my clients, but people in my profession cannot afford to dispense with the means of self-defense in case of need, and I kept a loaded revolver. During the first days of our marriage, she took a great interest in that gun. She asked all sorts of questions about it, and I explained it to her, its mechanism and how it worked. I even persuaded her one day to fire at a target. Note that too, please. Take no notice of her frightened look. I half undressed myself and lay down on the bed. I felt terribly exhausted. It was about 11 o'clock. She remained sitting in the same place without moving for about an hour. Then she extinguished the candle and lay down, also without undressing, on the sofa by the wall. For the first time, she did not come to bed with me. Note that too, please. I think we're about halfway through. Excuse me for a moment. I'm going to get some water. So, water break for everyone too, I suppose. That makes it. I'm back. Water break. Chekhov's gun, what's that? Is it just a normal interest in the gun? Yeah. This isn't from Anthony Chekhov. Wait, is his first name Anthony? I forget. What's Chekhov's first name again? Anton Chekhov, not Anthony. I keep thinking Anthony Chekhov, I don't know why. Anton Chekhov. This is Dostoyevsky. It's a different guy, so the gun is of no importance whatsoever. Okay, back to the reading. Now we're on chapter 6, A Terrible Reminiscence. Now, about this terrible reminiscence. I woke up in the morning at about 8 o'clock, I think, and it was already quite light in the room. I woke all at once, with all my mental faculties wide awake, and suddenly opened my eyes. She was standing by the window with the gun in her head. She did not see that I was awake and that I was looking at her. Suddenly I saw that she began moving slowly towards me with the gun in her hand. I quickly closed my eyes and pretended to be fast asleep. She went up to the bed and stood over me. I heard everything. The silence in the room was so deep that I could hear it. All at once I became conscious of one spasmodic movement, and I opened my eyes suddenly irresistibly against my will. She was looking straight at me, straight into my eyes, and the gun was already near my temple. Our eyes met, but we looked at each other for no more than a second. With a great effort I closed my eyes again, and in that instant I resolved with all the strength I possessed not to make another movement, not to open my eyes whatever happened. And it does happen, of course, that a man who is fast asleep suddenly opens his eyes, raises his head just for a second, and looks around the room, then a moment later, quite unconsciously replaces his head on the pillow and falls asleep without remembering anything. When after meeting her glance and feeling the gun at my temple, I suddenly shut my eyes and did not stir. She certainly could have assumed that I was really asleep and that I had seen nothing, particularly as it was scarcely conceivable that, having seen what I had seen, I should at such a moment have closed my eyes again. Yes, it was inconceivable, and yet she could have guessed the truth all the same. It was that thought that flashed through my mind suddenly at one and at the same instant, and 3 cheers for the lightning speed of human thought. If that was so, I felt, if she guessed the truth and knew that I was not asleep, then I had crushed her already by my readiness to accept death, and now her hand might falter. Her former determination might be shattered against a new startling impression. It is said that people standing on a great height seem to be irresistibly drawn into the abyss. I suppose many suicides and murders have been committed only because the gun was already in the hand of the murderer or self-destroyer. Here too is a yawning chasm. Here too is a declivity, a slope at an angle of 45 degrees on which it is impossible not to slip, and something seems to force you irresistibly to pull the trigger. The knowledge that I had seen everything, that I knew everything, and that I was waiting for death at her hands in silence could have checked her on that slope. The silence continued, and suddenly I felt the cool touch of steel at my temple. Air. You will ask me, did I have any hope of escape? I will answer you, and God knows I am speaking the truth, none at all, not an atom of hope, except perhaps 1 chance in 100. Why then did I accept death? Well, let me ask you in turn, of what use was life to me after a gun had been leveled against me by a human being I adored? Besides, I realized with the whole force of my being that at the very moment a struggle was going on between us, a life and death struggle, a duel in which I, the coward of the day before who had been expelled by his fellow officers for cowardice, was engaged. I knew it, and she knew it too, if she had guessed the truth and knew I was not asleep. Perhaps nothing of the sort really happened. Perhaps I never had those thoughts at the time. But all that must have taken place even without conscious thought. Yet I have done nothing but think of it every moment of my life since. But, you will ask again, why did I not save her from so heinous a crime? Oh, I've asked myself the same question 1,000 times since, every time when, with a cold shiver down my back, I have called that moment to mind, but my soul was then sunk in black despair. I was in mortal peril. I myself was on the very brink of total extinction, so how could I have saved anyone? And besides, what makes you think so? What makes you think that I wanted to save anyone at that moment? How can one tell what I was feeling then? But all the time, my mind was in a turmoil. The seconds passed. There was a dead silence. She still stood over me. Then all of a sudden I gave a start as a hope returned to me. I opened my eyes quickly. She was no longer in the room. I got out of bed. I had conquered, and she was conquered forever. I went out to have my tea. Tea was as a rule served in the other room, and she herself poured it out. I sat down at the table without uttering a word and took a glass of tea from her. About 5 minutes later I glanced at her. She was dreadfully pale, paler even than the night before, and she looked at me. Suddenly, seeing that I was looking at her, she smiled palely with her pale lips with a timid question in her eyes. So, she is still uncertain. She is still asking herself, does he or doesn't he know? Did he or didn't he see? I averted my eyes with a look of indifference. After tea, I locked up the shop, went to the market and bought an iron bedstead and a screen. On returning home, I had the bed put on the front room and the screen round it. That bed was for her. But I never said a word to her. She understood it without words. The bed made her realize that I saw everything and knew everything, and there could be no more any doubt about that. That night, I left the gun on the table as usual. She crept silently into her new bed at night. Our marriage was dissolved. She was conquered but not forgiven. During the night, she became delirious, and in the morning, she was in a high fever. She was in bed for 6 weeks. Oh, so that was the first chapter, and there's 2 chapters. So those are parts in the chapter, not chapters themselves. I apologize, I've been saying chapter for quite a while. Pawnbroker got me clutching pearls in fear and disgust. Me too. Dostoyevsky has me clutching pearls in fear and disgust. I don't know how I feel about it. I mean, it's very gripping, that's for sure. Okay. Let me just take a moment. Okay, chapter 2. 1. Part 1. A dream of pride. Lucaria had just told me she will not remain with me and that she will leave immediately after the funeral of her mistress. I knelt and prayed for 5 minutes. I wanted to pray for an hour, but all the time I kept thinking, and all such aching thoughts, and my head aches. What's the use of praying? It's a sin. It is strange, too, that I should not be able to sleep. When one is unhappy, especially when one is very unhappy, one always feels like sleeping after the first violent outbursts of grief. Men condemned to death, I'm told, sleep very soundly indeed on the last night. And so it ought to be. It is only natural, or they would not have been able to endure it. I lay down on the sofa, but I could not fall asleep. She was ill for 6 weeks, and we looked after her day and night. Lucaria and I and the trained nurse I had engaged from the hospital. I did not care how much money it cost me. On the contrary, I liked spending money on her. I called in Dr. Schroeder, and I paid him 10 rubles for a visit. When she regained consciousness, I stopped going into her room unless it was absolutely necessary. However, why am I describing all this? When she got up at last, she sat down quietly and silently in my room at the special table I had also bought for her at the time. Yes, it is quite true. Neither of us spoke at all. I mean, later on we did begin talking to each other, but just the usual things. Of course, I spoke as little as possible on purpose, but she too, I could see very well, was glad not to have to say an unnecessary word. I thought that quite natural on her part. She is too shaken and too subdued, I thought to myself, and she must of course be given time to forget and get used to things. And so was that we were silent. But every minute I was preparing myself for the future. I could not help thinking that she was doing the same, and I found it extremely diverting to try and guess what she was thinking just then. One more thing I will say. No one, of course, no one in the world knew of the agonies I suffered during her illness. I kept my worries to myself and did not even let Lucaria see how troubled I was. I couldn't even admit to myself the possibility that she might die before learning the truth, the whole truth. But when she was out of danger and began to regain her health, I recovered my composure. I remembered very quickly and completely. And that was not all. I made up my mind to put off our future for as long a time as possible, and for the time being to leave things as they were. Yes, just then something strange and peculiar happened to me. I don't know how else to describe it. I had triumphed, and the consciousness of that was quite sufficient for me, and so the whole winter passed. Oh, I was pleased as I had never been pleased in my life, and that all through the winter. You see, there had been a most terrible event in my life, which until then, that is to say, until the disastrous incident with my wife, weighed heavily upon my mind every day and every hour of the day. The loss of my reputation and my forced retirement from the army. To put it in a nutshell, I had been the victim of a most abominable injustice. It is true that my fellow officers never liked me for my difficult character, and perhaps even for my absurd character, my ridiculous character, though it often happens that what you regard as great, what is dear to you, what you esteem most highly, strikes your friends for some unaccountable reason as extremely funny. Oh, I was never liked at school. People never liked me, never at any time. Even Lucaria finds it impossible to like me, while, however, the incident in the regiment undoubtedly arose out of this general unpopularity of mine. Its direct cause was quite certainly due to an accident. I'm saying this because I don't think there can be anything more aggravating and intolerable than to be ruined by an accident which might or might not have happened by a fortuitous concatenation of circumstances which might have passed away like a cloud. For a man of education, nothing could be more humiliating. Now, what had happened was this. During an interval at the play, I went out to the bar, which was crowded with people, including a large number of army officers. While I was there, the hussar officer, AV, came in suddenly and began talking in a loud voice to two other hussar officers. He was telling them about Captain Bezumtsev of our regiment, who, so he said, had just created a disturbance, and who, he added, seemed to be drunk. The subject was soon dropped. Besides, the whole story was a mistake, for Captain Bezumtsev was not drunk at all, and the disturbance was not really a disturbance either. The hussars began talking about something else, and that was the end of it. But next day, the story reached our regiment, and of course the fact that I was the only officer of our regiment in the bar at once became the subject of general talk. It was remarked that when the hussar AV had spoken so insolently about Captain Bezumtsev, I had not gone over to him immediately and stopped him by rapping him on the knuckles. But why on earth should I have done that? If he had a bone to pick with Bezumtsev, it was their own personal affair and no business of mine. The officers of my regiment, meanwhile, decided that it was not a personal affair at all, but concerned the whole regiment. And since I was the only officer of our regiment present, I had, by my failure to take action, shown both to the officers and the civilians in the bar that there were officers in the regiment who did not care a damn for their honor or for the honor of their regiment. I could not agree with such an interpretation. I was given to understand that I could still put everything right, late though I was, if I demanded a formal explanation from AV. This, I did not choose to do so. In fact, I resented the whole thing most violently. I would not compromise with my pride and refused to have anything to do with their suggestion. I then at once resigned my commission. That is the whole story. I left the regiment a proud but broken man. Both my will and my mind had suffered a bad shock. As it happened, my sister's husband in Moscow just then squandered our small family fortune, including my own part in it, a tiny part, it is true. And I was left without a penny in the world. I could have gotten myself some civilian job, but I didn't. After my splendid uniform, I wasn't going to become some railway official. And so if it had to be shame, then let it be shame. If it had to be disgrace, then let it be disgrace. If it had to be degradation, then let it be degradation. The worse, the better. That was my choice. Then followed 3 years of terrible deprivation and horror, and even Vyazemsky's doshouse. A year and a half ago, my godmother, a wealthy old lady, died in Moscow, and among other banquets, she quite unexpectedly left me 3,000 rubles in her will. I thought things over, and there and then decided what I was going to do with myself. I made up my mind that I would become a pawnbroker and ask no favors from anyone. First, I must get money, then a home of my own, and then a new life far away from the memories of the past. That was my plan. Nevertheless, my somber past and reputation ruined forever were a constant source of mental anguish to me. The memory of it haunted me every day, every minute, and then I got married. Whether by chance or not, I don't know, but when I brought her into my home, I thought I was bringing a friend, and it was a friend I needed most of all. But a friend had to be taken in hand, licked into shape, and yes, even mastered. And how could I possibly explain it all at once to a 16-year-old girl, and one, besides, who was prejudiced against me? For instance, could I have convinced her that I was not a coward without the accidental assistance of the dreadful incident with the gun? Could I have convinced her that I have been falsely accused of cowardice in the regiment? But that dreadful incident came just in the nick of time. Having passed the test of the gun, I avenged the whole of my horrible past, and though no one knew about it, she knew, and that meant everything to me because she herself was everything to me. All the hopes of a bright future that I cherished in my dreams. She was the only person I had hoped to make my true friend in life, and I had no need of anyone else, and now she knew everything. At least, she knew that she had been too hasty in joining the camp of my enemies. That thought filled me with delight. In her eyes I could no longer be a blackguard, but at most perhaps a queer fellow. And even then, and even that, after all that had happened, was not at all displeasing to me. Queerness is not a vice in a man. On the contrary, it often exercises a powerful attraction on a woman's imagination. In fact, I deliberately postponed the final explanation. What had happened was for the moment quite sufficient for my peace of mind. It contained too many exciting scenes and a lot of material for my dreams. You see, the whole trouble is that I am a dreamer. I was quite satisfied to have enough material for my dreams. As for her, she, I thought, could wait. So the whole winter passed in a sort of expectation of something. I liked to steal a glance at her now and again when she sat at her little table. She was busy with her work, her sewing, and sometimes in the evening she would read books taken from my bookcase. The choice of books in the bookcase should have also spoken in my favor. She hardly ever went out. Every day after dinner, before dusk, I used to take her out for a walk. We took our constitutional and not entirely in silence as before. At least I did my best to pretend that we were not silent and that we were talking amicably together. But as I have already said, we both saw to it that our talks were not too long. I did it on purpose, and as for her, I thought it was important to give her time. It is, I admit, strange that not once till the end of the winter did it occur to me that while I liked looking at her stealthily, I had never during all the winter months caught her looking at me. I ascribed it to her shyness, and indeed her whole appearance did convey a picture of such gentleness, such utter exhaustion after her illness. No, thought I, don't interfere with her. Better wait, and she will come to you all of a sudden and of her own free will. The thought filled me with intense delight. I will add one more thing. Sometimes I would, as though on purpose, so inflame my own mind that I'd in fact succeed in working myself up into a mental and emotional rage against her. And it went on like that for some time, but my hatred of her could never ripen or strike roots in my heart. And besides, I couldn't help feeling myself that it was only a sort of game I was playing. Why, even when I had dissolved our marriage by buying the bed and the screen, I could never for one moment look upon her as a criminal. And not because I took too light a view of her crime, but because I had the sense to forgive her completely, from the very first day, even before I purchased the bed, that I confess was a little odd on my part. For where mortals are concerned, I'm very strict. Sorry, not mortals. On the contrary, in my eyes she was so thoroughly subdued, so thoroughly humiliated, so thoroughly crushed, that I could not help feeling horribly sorry for her sometimes. Though for all that, the idea of her humiliation was at times certainly very pleasing to me. What pleased me was the idea of our inequality. That winter, I happened to be responsible for a few acts of real kindness. I remitted 2 debts, and I advanced money to one poor woman without a pledge, and I never breathed a word about it to my wife, nor did I do it at all so that she could learn about it. But the woman herself came to thank me, and almost on her knees. In that way it became public property. I could not help thinking that she had learnt about the woman with real pleasure. But spring was close at hand. It was mid-April. We took out our double windows, and bright shafts of sunlight began lighting up our rooms, but the scales still covered my eyes and blinded my reason. Oh, those dreadful scales! How did it all happen that the scales suddenly fell from my eyes and that I suddenly saw and understood everything? Was it chance? Did the appointed day come at last? Was it a ray of sunshine that suddenly kindled a thought, or a surmise in my dull brain? No. It was neither a thought nor a surmise. It was a chord that had been mute a long time and that now came to life and began vibrating suddenly, flooding my darkened mind with light and showing up my devilish pride. I felt as though I had leapt to my feet. It all happened with such incredible suddenness. It happened towards evening, at about 5 o'clock, after dinner. Hello, Zero. Welcome. We're near the end, I think, we're more than halfway through this story, so I must apologize. I don't know how to catch it up to you, because it's all just very there's like a multitude of things going on, but essentially this is a short story about how a man is recalling the death of his wife and trying to justify to himself how he did nothing wrong and he was actually a fantastic husband or whatever. And then as the story goes very quickly, you'll realize no, he was a terrible like piece of shit person. But then what's more compelling to me is like, as I don't think he ever has a change of heart or character, but as you read more in his perspective, you slowly start to feel a little worse for the whole situation, which I find quite interesting. Reminds you of the narrator of Lolita. I have not read the book either. I've not. I don't know I know what it's about roughly, and I kind of know what it's about, but I've not read a summary either. Don't think it's something I will be reading on stream because yeah. But you know, well, we'll see. Anyways. Part 2. Chapter 2, Part 2. The scales suddenly fall. Just 2 words before I go on, already a month ago I noticed a strange wistfulness about her. She was not only silent, she was also wistful. Of that too I became aware all of a sudden. She was sitting and sewing something at the time, her head bent over her work, and she did not see that I was looking at her. It suddenly struck me. How thin she looked, how haggard, her face so pale, her lips so white, and this together with her wistfulness came as a great shock to me. I had already before heard her little dry cough, especially at night. I got up at once and went out to see Fyodor without saying anything about it to her. Fyodor came next day. She was very much surprised, her eyes wandering from Fyodor to me and back again. But I'm quite all right, she said with a sort of vague smile. Fyodor did not examine her very carefully, those doctors are sometimes so maddeningly offhand, but told me in the other room that she was suffering from the after effects of her illness and that it would not be a bad idea to take her to the seaside in the spring, or if that were impossible, to take a country cottage for the summer. He did not say anything, in fact, except that there was a weakness, or something of the sort. When Fyodor had gone, she suddenly said to me, looking very gravely at me, I'm quite all right, indeed, I am. But as she said it, she suddenly blushed, from shame, no doubt. Yes, it was quite obviously shame. Oh, now I understand it. She was ashamed, you see, that I was still her husband, that I was still taking care of her as though I were her real husband still. But at the same time, I did not realize it, and I ascribed her smile to her humility. Oh, those scales. And so a month later, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a bright sunny day in April, I was sitting in the pawn shop making up my accounts. All of a sudden I heard now, sitting at the table in our room, at her work, she began softly, ever so softly, to sing. This new incident made an overwhelming impression on me. To this day I can't explain it. Till then I had hardly ever heard her sing at all events. Not since the first day of our married life when we were still able to have some fun together, practicing target shooting with my gun. At that time her voice was still strong and clear, though hardly true, but very pleasant and healthy. But now the song sounded so feeble. Oh, I don't mean it was a plaintive tune, sorry. It was some love song, but it sounded as though her voice were cracked, broken, as though her dear little voice could not manage it, as though the song itself were sick. She sang in an undertone, and suddenly her voice, rising on a high note, broke. Such a poor little voice, and it broke off so miserably. She cleared her throat and started singing something again in a very soft and hardly audible voice. You may laugh at my agitation, but no one will ever understand the reason for it. No, I wasn't sorry for her yet, not yet. It was something quite different. To begin with, during the first few minutes at any rate, I suddenly felt bewildered and terribly surprised. It was a horrible, strange sort of surprise, painful and almost vindictive. She is singing, and while I am in the house. She hasn't forgotten about me, has she? Thunderstruck, I sat there for some time without stirring from my place. Then I suddenly got up, took my hat, and went out as though acting on impulse. At least I don't know why or where I was going. Lucaria was helping me on with my coat. She is singing? I asked Lucaria, involuntarily. Lucaria did not seem to know what I was talking about, and she went on staring at me incomprehensibly. But of course I was rather incomprehensible. Is it the first time you've heard her sing? No, sir, said Lucaria. She sometimes sings when you are out. I remember everything. I went down the stairs, went out into the street, and walked along at random. I walked to the corner and started looking vaguely ahead of me. All sorts of people passed by me, knocked against me, but I was not aware of anything. I hailed a cab and told the driver to take me to the police bridge. I haven't the faintest idea why. Then suddenly I changed my mind and gave him a 20 kopeck piece. Sorry to have troubled you, I said, laughing stupidly at him, but my heart was suddenly filled with a strange ecstasy. I went back home, quickening my pace as I walked along. The poor, cracked broken note was again ringing in my heart. My breath failed me. Yes, the scales were falling from my eyes. If she had started singing while I was in the house, it could only mean that she had forgotten all about me. That's what was so terribly clear. I realized it in my heart, but my soul was aglow with ecstasy, and it proved stronger than my fear. Oh, the irony of fate. Had there been anything else in my soul the whole winter? Could there have been anything else but this feeling of ecstasy? But where had I been myself all the winter? Had I been there with my soul? I ran up the stairs in a great hurry, and I don't remember whether I was apprehensive or not when I went in. All I remember is that the floor seemed to be swaying and that I felt as though I was floating in a river. Excuse me, I hope you didn't hear that. I burped just now again. I entered the room. She was sitting in her usual place with her head bent over her sewing, but she was no longer singing. She threw a rapid and casual glance at me. It was hardly a glance, really, just the usual indifferent sign of recognition one gives when someone comes into the room. I went up straight to her and sat down beside her, close to her like one demented. She looked at me quickly, as though she were afraid of me. I took her hand, and I don't remember what I said to her, or rather what I meant to say to her, for I couldn't even speak properly. My voice shook and did not obey me. Nor did I know what to say. All I did was to grasp for breath. Let's talk. You know, say something. I suddenly stammered out something utterly idiotic. Oh, how could I think of anything sensible to say at that moment? She started again, and as she looked at my face, she drew back from me in horror. But almost immediately, a look of stern surprise came into her eyes. Yes, surprise and stern. She looked at me with wide open eyes. That sternness, that stern surprise seemed all at once to deal me a stunning blow. So it's love you still want? Love? That look of surprise asked me, though she herself never uttered a word. But I read it all. My world came crashing about my ears, and I just collapsed at her feet. Yes, I fell down at her feet. She jumped up quickly, but I seized her hands and held her back with all the force at my command. And I fully understood my despair. Oh, I understood it all right. But you see, ecstasy was blazing so fiercely in my heart that I feared that I should die. I kissed her feet rapturously, in a transport of happiness. Yes, in a transport of happiness. Boundless, infinite happiness. And I did it, though I realized full well all the hopelessness of my despair. I wept. I tried to say something, but could not speak. Her surprise and terror suddenly gave way to a sort of worried thought, a thought of great urgency, and she looked at me strangely, wildly even. She wanted to understand something, without a moment's delay, and she smiled. She was ashamed that I was kissing her feet, horribly ashamed, and she kept drawing them away from me. But I immediately kissed the spot where her foot had rested. She saw it and began suddenly laughing from embarrassment. You know the feeling when one starts to laughing from embarrassment. She became hysterical. I saw it coming. Her hands were trembling, but I paid no attention to it. I went on murmuring that I loved her and that I wouldn't get up. Let me kiss your dress, let me worship you like this all my life. I don't know. I don't remember, but suddenly she broke into sobs and trembled all over. She had a terrible fit of hysterics. I had frightened her. I picked her up in my arms and carried her to the bed. When her attack was over, she sat up in bed and, looking terribly distressed, she seized me by the hands and begged me to calm myself. Come, don't torment yourself. There, be calm, please. And once more she burst into tears. All that evening I remained at her side. I kept telling her that I'd take her to Boulogne to bathe in the sea. Now, at once, in a fortnight, that she had such a cackled little voice. I had heard it that afternoon that I would give up my pawn shop, sell it to Dobronravov, that we should start life afresh. But above all, Boulogne. She listened to me, but she was still afraid. It was not that, however, that worried me at the time. What worried me was that I felt more and more irresistibly drawn to fling myself at her feet again, to kiss again, again and again, the ground on which her feet rested, and to pray to her, and I shall ask nothing, nothing more of you. I kept repeating every minute, don't answer me, don't take any notice of me at all, only let me look at you from a corner. Make me your slave, your lapdog. She wept. And I thought you'd let me alone, she said. Suddenly, the words escaping her involuntarily. So much so that quite possibly she herself was not aware of what she said. And yet, oh, that was the most important, the most fateful sentence she uttered that evening, and one that was only too easy for me to understand, and it stabbed my heart as though with a knife. It explained everything to me. Everything. But while she was beside me, while she was before my eyes, I was full of hope and I was terribly happy. Oh, I exhausted her completely that evening, and I realized it. But I kept thinking that any moment I might succeed in changing it all. At length, towards night, she was utterly worn out, and I persuaded her to go to sleep. She fell asleep at once and slept soundly. I expected her to be delirious, and she was a little. I kept getting up every other minute in the night and went softly in my slippers to have a look at her. I wrung my hands over her as I looked at that sick creature in that poor little bed, the iron bedstead I had bought her for 3 rubles. I knelt down, but I did not dare to kiss her feet while she was asleep, and without her permission. I knelt to pray, but jumped to my feet almost at once. Lucuria was keeping an eye on me and kept coming in and out of the kitchen. I went out to her and told her to go to bed. I told her that tomorrow everything would be quite different. And I believed it. Blindly, madly, frighteningly. Oh, my heart overflowed with rapture. I was only waiting for the next day. No, I did not believe in any trouble in spite of the symptoms. I had not come to my senses yet, though the scales had fallen from my eyes. And for a long, long time, I did not come to my senses. Oh, not till today, till this very day. And how could I have expected to come to my senses then? Wasn't she still alive then? Wasn't she still before me and I before her? Tomorrow she'll wake up and I'll tell her all this and she will see it all. That was what I kept saying to myself then. It was so clear and simple, and hence my ecstasy. The main thing was the trip to Boulogne. For some reason I kept thinking that Boulogne was everything. That there was something final. About Boulogne. To Boulogne! To Boulogne! I waited frantically for the morning. Wow, this is weird. This is really weird and really good. It's so strangely real, but also unpredictable. I don't know. I just... What's going on with this guy? What is going on with this guy? Hello, Grossly Green. Welcome. We're towards the end of the text. So I hope you're not too lost, but we're getting towards the end of A Gentle Creature by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. It's my first time reading Dostoyevsky, so I apologize if I'm just not getting some bits of it. And if I'm tripping over words because, well, it's my first time reading this text, I've never read it. I really like how this is written. Me too, me too. It's quite good. Okay. Chapter 3. Or rather, Chapter 2, Part 3, or Act 3. I understand it too well. And all that was only a few days ago. 5 days, only 5 days ago. Last Tuesday. Oh, if there had been a little more time. If only she had waited a little longer, I would have dispersed this terrible cloud of darkness, and was she not absolutely calm and composed? The very next day she listened to me with a smile, though no doubt she did look a little embarrassed. Yes, that above all. Her embarrassment, I mean, all the time, all during those 5 days I could not help noticing that she was either embarrassed or ashamed. And frightened too, very frightened. I don't want to argue about it. It would be mad to deny it. She was frightened. But after all, that was natural enough. How could she help being frightened? For hadn't we been strangers to one another for such a long time? Hadn't we become so terribly estranged from each other? And now suddenly, like a bolt from the blue, all this. But I paid no attention to her fear. A new life shone like a bright star before me. It is true. It is absolutely true. I made a mistake, perhaps many mistakes. As soon as we woke next morning, it was on Wednesday, I had once made a mistake. I had once begun to treat her as my friend. I was too much in a hurry, much too much in a hurry. But I simply had to confess everything to her. Yes, my confession was absolutely necessary, even more than a confession. I did not conceal from her what I had been concealing from myself all my life. I told her frankly that all during the winter that I had never, for a moment, doubted that she loved me. I explained to her that my money-lending business was nothing but a symptom of my loss of willpower. It was nothing but a mental aberration, a personal idea of self-castigation and self-exaltation. I explained to her that I was a coward in the bar of the theater that evening. I couldn't help it. It has something to do with my character, my oversensitiveness. I was thrown into a panic by the surroundings. It was the fact that it took place in a theater bar that unnerved me. What had made me so nervous was, how could I walk up to the hussar officer? How could I do it without cutting a ridiculous figure? What I was afraid of was not the duel, but that I might make a fool of myself. Later, of course, I would not admit it, and I tormented myself and everybody else. I had tormented her for it too. In fact, I only married her so as to be able to torment her for it. In general, I spoke for the most part as though I were in a fever. She kept clasping my hands, begging me to stop. You're exaggerating, you're tormenting yourself. And again, she was weeping. Again, she was on the point of becoming hysterical. She kept asking me all the time not to say anything about it, not to think of it at all. I disregarded her entreaties, or almost disregarded them. Spring, alone, there was the sun there. There was our new sun there. I could speak of nothing else. I shut up the pawn shop. I transferred my business to Dobronravov. On the spur of the moment, I even proposed to her to distribute all my money among the poor. All but the original 3,000 rubles I had received from my godmother. That money would pay for our trip to Boulogne, and when we came back, we'd start a new life. A life of honest work. So it was decided, for she did not contradict me. She said nothing, she only smiled, and it seemed that she smiled more out of consideration for me so as to not disappoint me. I realized, of course, that I was worrying her. Do not imagine that I was such a fool or such an egoist as to not see it. I saw everything, everything to the last detail. I saw and I knew everything more than anyone. All my despair was laid bare. I told her everything about myself and about her, and about Lucaria. I told her that I had wept. Oh, I too changed the subject. I did not want to remind her of certain things, and once or twice she looked quite cheerful. Yes, I remember that. I remember it distinctly. Why do you say I looked at her and saw nothing? If only this had not happened, everything would have been different. Why didn't she tell me that amusing story about Gil Blas and the Archbishop of Granada herself the day before yesterday? We were discussing books. She was telling me about the books she had been reading that winter, and it was then that she told me about that scene from Gil Blas. And she laughed, too. Yes, she laughed, and good Lord, what a sweet, childish laughter it was. Just as she used to laugh at the time of our engagement, a moment, only a fleeting moment. How glad I was. How happy. I was terribly struck by it, by the story of the Archbishop, I mean. She could then find so much happiness and peace of mind as to be able to enjoy a literary masterpiece. What else could it mean but that she was beginning to regain her self-composure completely, that she was already beginning to believe that I would let her alone? I thought you'd let me alone. That was what she had said on Tuesday, wasn't it? Oh, the thought of a 10-year-old girl. And she did believe that everything would really remain as it was. She believed that she'd always be sitting at her table and I at mine, and that the two of us would go on like that till we were old. All of a sudden I come up to her as a husband, and a husband wants love. Oh, how blind I was. Oh, what a frightful misunderstanding. Another mistake I made was to have looked at her with such rapture. I should have controlled myself, for my transports only frightened her. But did I not control myself? Did I kiss her feet again? No, never for a moment did I betray the fact that, well, that I was her husband. Oh, that thought never entered my head. All I did was to worship her, but it was quite obviously impossible for me to have been silent all the time. I had to say something. I suddenly told her that I enjoyed talking to her. I said that I thought her incomparably better educated and mentally developed than I was. She blushed crimson and looked very embarrassed. She said I was exaggerating. Then, fool that I was, I could not restrain myself and told her with what delight I had listened to her battle of wits with that awful swine, how overjoyed I had been when I realized as I stood behind the door how much hatred there lay hidden in all her replies to that unspeakable cad. How pleased I had been with all her clever repartees, her brilliant sallies combined with such childlike artlessness. She seemed to start. She murmured something about my exaggerating again, and all of a sudden her face darkened. She buried it in her hands and broke into sobs. Here I wasn't able to restrain myself any longer. I went down on my knees before her again. I began kissing her feet. Again and again, as on Tuesday, it all ended in hysterics. That was yesterday evening, and in the morning. In the morning. Why, you madman, it was this morning, only a few hours ago. Listen and try to understand. When we met at the tea table a few hours ago after last night's fit of hysterics, she surprised me by her calmness. Yes, she was absolutely self-composed, and all night I had been trembling with fear because of what happened yesterday, and quite suddenly she herself came up to me, and folding her hands began telling me, only a few hours ago, she was guilty. That she was fully aware of it, that her guilt had been torturing her all winter. That it was torturing her even now, that she appreciated my generosity very much, that I will be a true and faithful wife to you, that I will always respect you. Then I leapt to my feet like a madman and embraced her. I kissed her face. I kissed her on her lips, like a husband for the first time after a long separation. And why? Why did I go out after that? Only for a couple of hours. Our passports were abroad. Oh God, why didn't I come back 5 minutes earlier? Only 5 minutes earlier. And that crowd at our gates, those eyes staring at me. Oh God. Lucaria says, oh, I shall never let Lucaria go now. She knows everything. She's been with us all the winter, and she'll be able to tell me everything. Lucaria says that when I had gone out of the house, and only about 20 minutes before I came back, she suddenly went into our room where her mistress was at the time, intending to ask her something. I forget what. She noticed that her icon, the same icon of the Holy Virgin, had been taken out of the case and was standing before her on the table, as though her mistress had only a moment ago been saying her prayers before it. What's the matter, madam? Nothing, Lucaria, you can go. Then she said, wait a minute, Lucaria. And she went up to her, she went up to her and kissed her. Are you happy, madam? Lucaria asked. Yes, thank you, Lucaria. I am happy. Master ought to have asked your pardon a long time ago, madam. Thank God you've made it up now. All right, Lucaria, she said. You can go now, Lucaria. And she smiled, so strangely that 10 minutes later, Lucaria went back to have a look at her. She was standing by the wall, sir, Lucaria told me, close to the window. Leaning with her arm against the wall, she was, and her head pressed against her arm. Standing like that, she was, sir, and thinking, and so deep in thought was she, that she did not hear me open the door of the other room. She didn't see me standing there and watching her, and I saw her smile, sir. She was standing by the wall near the window, thinking and smiling. I looked at her, turned round quietly, and went back to my kitchen. Preoccupied with my own thoughts I was, sir. Only suddenly I heard the windows open. I went back at once, meaning to tell her that it was very fresh outside and that she might catch her death of cold if she wasn't careful, and Lord, sir, I saw she had climbed up on the windowsill, standing there drawn up to her full height she was, in the open window, with her back to me, clasping the icon in her hands. I called out to her, Madam, Madam, and she must have heard me, sir, for she made a movement, as if to turn round, but she didn't. Took a step forward, she did, then pressed the icon to her bosom and threw herself out of the window. All I remember is that when I went into the yard, she was still warm. The horror of it was that all the time I felt those eyes staring at me. At first they shouted, then they suddenly fell silent, and all at once the crowd parted to let me through. And there she lay with the icon. I dimly remember going up to her, silently, and looking at her for a long time. All of them crowded round me and began saying something to me. Lucaria was there too, but I did not see her. I only remember the workman. He kept shouting at me. A handful of blood poured out of her mouth. A handful of blood. A handful. And pointing to the blood on a stone. I believe I touched the blood with my finger, smeared my finger, and looked at my finger. I remember that. While he kept shouting at me, a handful, a handful. What the hell is a handful? I yelled at him with all my might, so I'm told, and raising my hands, rushed at him. Oh, the whole thing is mad. An awful misunderstanding. It's impossible. Improbable. Impossible. Okay. I think this is the last bit, so we'll see. Chapter 2, Part 4. I was only 5 minutes too late. And is it probable? Can one really say that it was possible? Why did this woman die? What made her do it? Oh, believe me, I understand. I understand everything. Why she died is still a mystery. Was she afraid of my love? Did she really ask herself seriously whether to accept it or not? And was the question too much for her, and did she prefer to die? I know. It's no use racking my brains. She had promised me too much, given me too many promises, and she was afraid that she would not be able to keep them. That's clear. There are a number of other facts, which are simply dreadful. But there is still the unanswered question, why did she die? That question keeps hammering at my brain. I would have let her alone if she had wanted me to let her alone. But she did not believe it. No, she didn't. And that was the real trouble. No, it's a lie. It wasn't that at all. It was simply that she had to be honest with me. She knew that to me, to love meant to love entirely, and not as she would have loved the shopkeeper, and being too chaste and too pure, she did not want to deceive me with a love that would have satisfied the shopkeeper. Did not want to deceive me with a love that was only half a love, or a quarter of a love, too honest, too... That's the trouble. I wanted to instill tolerance into her, remember? A curious idea. Another terribly interesting question is whether she respected me or not. I don't know whether in her heart she despised me or not. I don't believe she did. It certainly is very strange. Why didn't it ever occur to me all the winter that she despised me? I was absolutely convinced she didn't until that moment when she looked at me. Stern surprise. Yes, stern. It was then that I knew at once that she did despise me. I knew it irrevocably, forever. Oh, let her despise me all her life, so long as she was alive, so long as she was alive. Only a few hours ago she was still walking about, she was still talking. I can't for the life of me understand why she should have thrown herself out of the window. And how was I to have suspected it even 5 minutes before she did? She did it. I've asked Lucaria to come in. I never part with Lucaria now. No, I shall never part with her, nor for anything in the world. Oh, I dare say we could have still found some way of patching things up. The trouble was, we got so terribly estranged from one another during the winter. But couldn't we have grown used to one another again? Why couldn't we have come together again? I am generous, and so was she. That was one point we had in common. A few more words, 2 more days, no more, and she would have understood everything. What is so awful is that the whole thing was just an accident, an ordinary, horrible, senseless accident, an accident that would never have happened an accident that would never have happened if I hadn't been late. I was 5 minutes too late, only 5 minutes. Had I come 5 minutes earlier, that impulse which drove her to commit suicide would have passed away like a cloud, and it would never again have occurred to her to do anything so horrible, and it would have all ended by her understanding everything. And now again, empty rooms. Again, I'm alone in the whole world. I can hear the pendulum ticking away. What does it care? There's nothing it can be sorry for. I've no one left in the world. That's the horror of it. I kept walking, always walking. I know. You need not prompt me. You think it's damned funny that I should be complaining about an accident, about being 5 minutes too late. An accident? But it's as plain as a pikestaff. Just think. Why didn't she leave a note behind? Just a few words to say, don't blame anyone for my death, as people always do. Is it likely that it should never have occurred to her that Lucaria might get in trouble with the police over her? She was alone with her mistress, people might have said, and she could have pushed her out of the window. She might at any rate have been dragged off to the police, blameless though she was, but for the fact that from the yard and from the windows of the next door house 4 men had seen her stand with the icon in her hands and jump out of the window, but that too was an accident. I mean, that she should have been seen by other people who just happened to be about at the time. No, the whole thing was not premeditated. It was just an impulse, and an accountable impulse, a sudden impulse, a momentary aberration. What does the fact that she had been praying in front of the icon prove? It certainly doesn't show that she had been saying her prayers before committing suicide. The whole impulse probably only lasted about 10 minutes. Her decision to do away with herself must have been taken when she was standing by the wall. Her head pressed against her arm, and smiled. An idea flashed through her mind, set it in a whirl, and she could not resist it. Whatever you may say, the whole thing is quite obviously a misunderstanding. I'm not as bad as all that. She could have lived with me, and what if the whole thing was caused by anemia? Simply by anemia, by exhaustion, utter exhaustion of all her vital energies. She got so terribly exhausted last winter. Yes, that's what it is. It's too late. How thin she looks in her coffin. How sharp her little nose has grown. Her eyelashes lie straight as arrows, and nothing was crushed in her fall. Not a bone was broken, just that handful of blood, a dessert spoonful, I suppose, an internal hemorrhage. A strange thought. What if it were possible to keep her here and not to bury her? Or if they take her away, but no, I shan't let them. I'm damned if I'll let them. Oh, Lord, I mustn't talk like that. Oh, of course she'll have to be taken away. I know that. I'm not mad. I'm not raving. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever been as clear-headed as I am now. But I can't. I just can't get used to the idea that once more there will be no one in the house. Once more 2 rooms, and once more I shall be here by myself with the pledges. It's mad. Mad. That's where the real madness lies. I torture her till she could stand it no longer. That's what it was, yes. That's what it was. What do I care for your laws now? What are your customs to me? Your morals, your life, your state, your faith? Let your judges judge me. Let me be brought before your courts, before your public courts. And I will declare that I do not recognize anything. The judge will order me to hold my peace. Silence, officer, he'll shout. And I'll shout back at him. What power do you possess to exact obedience from me? Why did dark insensibility destroy what was dearer to me than anything else in the world? What do I care for your laws now? I shall live my own life. Oh, nothing makes any difference to me now. She's blind. Blind. She's dead. She cannot hear me. Oh, you don't know what a paradise I should have built for you. Paradise was in my soul, and I would have planted it all around you. What does it matter if you did not love me? What does that matter? Everything would have been as it was. I should have let you alone. You would have talked to me only as a friend, and we should have laughed and been happy together. We should have gazed joyfully into each other's eyes, and so we should have lived. And even if you had fallen in love with another man, it wouldn't have mattered a bit. Wouldn't have made any difference to me. Fall in love if you wish. You'd have walked with him and laughed, and I'd have watched you from the other side of the street. And, oh, I don't care what would have happened if only she would open her eyes just once. Just for one moment only. She would have looked at me, as she did a few hours ago when she stood before me and swore to be a faithful wife to me. Oh, I'm sure she would have understood everything at a glance. Insensibility. Oh, nature. People are alone in the world. That's what is so dreadful. Is there a living man on the plain? Cries the Russian legendary hero. I, too, echo the same cry. No one answers. They say the sun brings life to the universe. The sun will rise and look at it. Isn't it dead? Everything is dead. Dead men are everywhere. There are only people in the world, and all around them is silence. That's what the earth is. Men love one another. Who said that? Whose commandment is it? The pendulum is ticking away unfeelingly, dismally. 2 o'clock in the morning. Her dear little boots stand by her little bed as though waiting for her. No, seriously. When they take her away tomorrow, what's to become of me? Go back here. Okay. I believe that is A Gentle Creature by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Kind of happy to see a purposely deplorable protagonist. It's a refreshing change of pace. I think I've seen it. I mean, it's. I think it's been a bit more common recently, but I can't exactly give you examples because I'm not well read enough. Yeah, it was a good read. It was good. I really enjoyed it. I hope you can tell I was enjoying it. I think I really got into the character as I was reading it out loud. I tried to, at least. I wasn't very good. I wasn't very good. I wasn't as good as I could be. I kept tripping over the words. Some of them were, I would like to blame that it's because of the text blurring some parts of the words, but that's my blaming it. What else do I have to blame? I guess I can blame that I'm a little sick as well. I can blame that. But beyond that, no, I did get really into it as the story progressed, and I tried at certain parts to read it out loud the way it sounded in my head, which is sometimes different, and I trust, and so there's an active effort, at least that I made, to try to sync it up and make it the same, if that makes any sense at all. I don't know if that made any sense. Like, you can read something out loud and the words go through your mouth, but then there's also like an inner voice in your head that's reading it and seeing it. And I was trying to match my outer voice with my inner voice. That's what I was trying to say. But anyways. Very well too. Thank you. Thank you. I tried. This is really, really good. This affirms to me that I want to read more Dostoyevsky, and that not only do I want to read more, I think one of the good things is he has quite a few short stories, so I can actually go through a few of them on stream as well with you all. I would imagine that people here have enjoyed it too, just as I have. I should look forward to more works from him, because yeah, I want to read Dostoyevsky because everyone's told me to read it. And now that I've read it, I think, yeah, I should read more of this. It's really good. I don't know how I feel about the protagonist, about the man, the pawn shop owner. I don't know how I feel about him. Well, I think I do roughly. If I were to, if I were to just, put my foot in and go, okay, here's what you should do. I would have said not mistake of the author. No, what I mean is, okay, here's the advice I would offer the man if he was real and he was seeking advice. And it's like, I would try to explain to him that he has a bad problem dehumanizing his wife, is probably what I would say. But then, is that really helpful? Because then you have to explain many, many concepts and shake their worldview perhaps in a way that they weren't ready for. You can tell that for most of the story, by his own admission and accord, the pawnbroker kind of, puts the girl below him at all times, and it takes pride in the fact that she's beneath him. But then all of a sudden there's this weird maniacal shift he has where all of a sudden she's like this prized object of great importance to him, and he's going to build this paradise for her. But you also see in both of those instances, he's not really truly seeing the person for who she is. There's still like this almost unbridgeable distance between these two characters, which is so interesting. So interesting. The coping and the quote unquote like contradictions he makes in his statements and his judgments and things he says, even by his own admission, are completely intentional, of course, as Dostoyevsky takes time to explain before the story. There's like a little bit of an explanation where it's like, which I found unnecessary for me, but would have probably informed the viewer, that this all is intentional. And I just, there's a deep welling sadness in all of this as well that I'm feeling, where a part of me likes to think that, oh, thankfully this was just 19th century Russia, it's not the case anymore. People are much better about things and less, terrible, but I know that's not true. I'm saddened by the fact that it's not true. And perhaps against my better judgment, I have to say, I feel bad for the man. I do. I feel bad for him in the sense that, like, he was awful. He was completely awful, yes, but you can't help but hope throughout reading the text that maybe there is hope for this man. Maybe he can be redeemable. There are certainly maybe some, it's difficult to even say actually what his redeeming qualities really are, because when he lays them out, it doesn't sound very redeeming. it really just sounds like part of the bits of him that are so despicable, which is, his putting the girl beneath him. I don't know. Oh. Obviously, like, I mean, get the obvious things out of the way. Like, he was always in love with the idea of her more than like her actually. That much is very clear, and that much I think is almost reinforced by a lot of the times him going in his narration, going on and on about, oh, I understand women and their psychology. I know exactly what she's thinking. I can see it through her eyes, and I know. But what she doesn't know is that I know, and I've beaten her in this, in this game or whatever. That much is clear. That much is very obvious. I don't think there's anything not obvious I can say right now about the text, honestly. I want it to sit with me. I think it's very, very good. Of course, the dramatic irony in the beginning of, like, knowing what happens in the fate of the girl, and then hearing him, like, you already know from the beginning that this entire narration takes place, like, after she kills herself. And you can hear him at the beginning, this, like, he is quite shook and maniacal. Then he kind of gets into his rhythm in his own world, and he starts to recall things, and it becomes almost like calmer. And then as he remarks and recollects certain parts of the experience, certain parts of his memory, he becomes more delirious again, and then the energy wanes in and out, and it's just so, like, it's so gripping. Put me in, coach. I would show him some reality. It's not him you have to fight alone, though, is the thing. It's like, it's not just that he's the problem. It's, like, also just the whole wider structure of everything around him that has reinforced it to be the case, right? You can see glimpses of that in the story with the man who the girl was, quote unquote, having an affair with. I think it was realistic. The way you were tripping over the words seemed like something the protagonist would do as well. That's good. Well, I hope that's a good accident. That's a happy accident. I'm just tripping over my words because I need to be more eloquent and well spoken, and I'm working on it. That's why I'm tripping over them. But yes. Only hoped he would redeem himself so she can have a better life. Yeah. I mean, at least for me, I had a little bit of hope that they could have both had a better life, and I was really believing it too when the pawnbroker was getting into it, and he was like, "It's gonna be great. We're gonna go to Boulogne, and we're gonna start a new life there, and I'm gonna sell my pawn shop, and everything's gonna be good again." I obviously, like, there's the dramatic irony of knowing what happens already, but you can really hear in his soul almost a yearning. Maybe it wasn't always there. Maybe it is in reaction to the death he sees right in front of him. But I think through the narration, you can see the intention through him. I don't know. Definitely picking this up from the library. Things really got me interested. Great. Yes. Borrow books from the library and read them. Very good. Very good. I can't wait to read other texts as well. So this, like, particular archive, this is like archive.org, because that's what I do when I do a reading stream, is I try to look for an online source that's free. This is titled The Gentle Creature and Other Stories by Dostoyevsky. It's translated with an introduction by David Magarshak. And it features a few short stories. It features a few. It features White Nights, The Honest Thief, The Christmas Tree and a Wedding, The Peasant Mary, Memoirs from a Dark Cellar, A Gentle Creature, and The Dreams of a Ridiculous Man. So there's, like, there's a few here we could knock out, actually. Quite excited by it. Wait, can you just click on it? Can't. I thought you could, like, click on the... I got really excited. I was like, oh, does it work? It doesn't work. Can't jump through it. But yeah, so this text, will be in the description. You can read the other short stories as well. They shouldn't take too long. Me reading them out loud only took, how long was it? Streams like 2.5 hours. I probably spent about half an hour yapping. It's about like 2 hours reading out loud. I imagine it would be a quick read for anyone else who's reading internal, like, in their head. the moment of him thinking of a better future is desperation. Oh yeah, like he's definitely thinking like, oh, this will fix everything. But he doesn't once at all actually. He was never able at all to ever see what the girl actually wanted. He deluded himself into thinking, yeah, the paradise is what would fix everything. But like, you know, that's just all in his head. He doesn't understand what's going on in the girl's head. Also, he's like 40 and the girl's 16, but you know, like that's that's part of the point of the literature, I would imagine, which is, you know, definitely something to think about. Reading your head is such a strange thing because I never had an internal voice until you could. Oh, really? The internal voice, the internal head voice thing is pretty cool as well. Because I think I've always, from what I remember, I've always had it, but it's because I read quietly. And so when I read quietly in my head, I'm reading, there is a voice in my head. And then when that transfers to like, oh, I'm thinking quietly, or I'm trying to deliberate consciously rather than subconsciously, which leads to an internal voice as well. Which later turns into practicing phrases, but whatnot. But that was, you know, some 50 odd years ago. Doubt that she would have been happy if they went there. Oh yeah, me too. What I do wonder though is what would have happened if the pawnbroker did step in, you know, 10, 20, like 15 minutes earlier and caught her before, you know, she jumped off. I wonder what would have happened then. That's what I'm thinking about. Kind of lost track was the importance of the icon mentioned. Yeah, she does die grabbing it. It was an icon of Mother Mary, I think. Was what it was, I believe, and it was in a little frame. I don't know what to make of it yet. So, good question, excellent question. I can't answer it, unfortunately. I'm sorry. I think she would have done it another time. She doesn't seem to care about her as a person. Yeah, maybe she would have done it during the holiday. Maybe afterwards. I don't know. Maybe like the sudden change of heart, the mania that was induced in him towards the end where he was like, I'm selling everything and we're going to go to alone. Maybe that would have paved the way for him to actually try to genuinely reach out to her. Maybe. Still have a hard time believing that some people don't have an internal voice. Me too. Because, no, I kind of get it because my internal voice is not like always active. Sometimes I'm just looking at things and instead of reading. Okay, so this is something about reading a quick, you know what? Let me just go back here actually. Okay. Again, sorry for the stinger being jank, but this is what it is. One of the things I've thought about for the internal voice thing is my internal voice is not always active, if that makes any sense. Sometimes when I'm looking at something, or like I'm reading a short sign, or like just looking at something that requires less brain power in myself, I will just it will directly transfer into concept. You know, it doesn't go through this deliberation of like reading. And so what I mean is, for example, if the word red, maybe not red, if the word train is in front of me, so if I were to consciously really, you know, chew on it, I would look at the word train and then think of the word train and then think of the train, think of a train. And then look at the other context of the sentence and then figure out what, you know, what else how else to decorate that. But that's only if I'm like really, really slowly thinking about something, thinking something through. But a lot of the times I'm just, Like it just directly transfers into idea in my head. So when I'm reading something quietly, I don't read it out loud in my mind. The ideas just sort of transfer, I guess, from the text to like my head, if that makes any sense at all. And it's not just, oh, it takes time to sound out the words and have them leave my mouth and, you know, to balance my breathing with doing that. That makes it slower to read out loud. It's also because when I'm reading in quiet, in solid, in quiet, I'm not in silence. I'm not sounding out the words just in my head silently. I'm not sounding out the words at all. I'm just, for lack of a better word, I'm just reading. Mother Mary's purity and motherhood thing. Yeah, I can see that. But yeah, the icon is still just the exact interpretation of the icon still evades me. I still don't know what to make of it, but it's something to think about, something to perhaps read interpretations of. Enjoy nonetheless. This is one of his many works. I'm sure there's going to be more that might help me come back to this and appreciate this more than I already do. But yes, that's the exciting bits of diving into a new author, I guess, is you can always come back to the first thing the first few things you read to gain a newfound appreciation once you understand their style and their sort of their writing style, like, and what they usually play with in terms of ideas and themes. Sorry, I was just I forget I'm like streaming. I forget I'm like on a stream. I was just thinking about something. Okay, I think that was a great reading stream. I really enjoyed the story. I really enjoyed the text of it. More Dostoyevsky to come, I'm sure. Tomorrow I will not be streaming, but the day after I should be streaming. What will I be doing tomorrow? No, sorry, not tomorrow. I will be doing something on Saturday. I'm going to be playing Papa's Bulgaria. I think that's what it is. That's the burger flipping game. It's like a flash game. It's like on the Cool Math Games site or whatever. I'll be playing that. That's the last thing I'll play for employment week theme, maybe, probably. That's happening on Saturday. So look forward to that. Tomorrow I will be not streaming, so don't expect there to be one tomorrow. Hi, back from training. Did you miss anything? You didn't miss much. You just missed like the whole stream. Don't worry about it. Yep, burger flipping is the grand finale for the working arc. Yep, it's exactly what's gonna happen. Hope you better soon. Thank you for the stream. Thank you for being in the stream, everyone. I will feel better soon. I must feel better soon. I have to. I'll try to actually get honey tonight and drink it. Might be better for me. It's been going on. I have like a sore throat for like 2 weeks now. It's not too sore. It's just like I cough a bit, and then sometimes it just like it doesn't feel good when I wake up in the morning. It's super dry. I don't know. Papa's games got me through middle and high school. Interesting. I've never played a single one of them. I don't know what they do. I don't know what they are. It's just people really seemed like they wanted me to play it, and it also I don't know a better burger flipping game, and it's free. So you know what? That's there. Why would I pay money to play a burger flipping game? It makes no sense. It contradicts the theme, right? Anyways, that's for Saturday, which should be a bit more accommodating for the different time zones that go on, as I am aware of them, of the people who clock into these streams, I guess, lack for a better word, at very different times. Hopefully it being Saturday will be better. But yes, that's all to say. That's all to do. Dostoyevsky is brilliant. and I would like to read more from him. I hope you all too. I hope everyone reads more as well. That's the point of these streams. But if not, at least listen. At least listen. Do your best. Do your best. Okay. Any other like questions before I go? Are you American? I am Alexandrian. I am from Alexandria. I'm trapped eternally. The last library of in the Library of Alexandria, which doesn't exist now, right? It was burned down. Well, that's why it doesn't quite look like the Library of Alexandria. If I were to draw a comparison to literature, I could perhaps paint the picture a little better. It would be like the Library of Babel, which is a short story one could read. Maybe I'll read that for like the first anniversary. Like week. I should do that. That's, you know what? That's confirmed. That's confirmed. The moment I said it in my head, the idea was perfect. And so it shall be. As for whether or not my accent is American, yes, sort of. I have a weird accent where it is mostly American, but then there are some words I pronounce kind of strangely. But yes. If that was the question. Accents are strange. They're just strange things. I suppose mine is as well, but you know, just in general, I find them strange. Maybe that's me coping. But anyway, okay. Thank you for the question. Thank you. Bros pre-gaming thinking week. I'm pre-gaming thinking week all the time. Thinking week is like the anniversary. That's what the anniversary week is gonna be. Probably it's gonna be thinking week. We'll see. We'll see what that shakes out to be. But that's still a long ways away. That's double the amount of time I've spent streaming, which is a long time, is what it feels like. Because I'm getting really used to going live now, which I don't know if is a good thing or not. But it's been 6 months since I first streamed and did anything. I've never streamed before. I've never done anything, and we're gonna have to do 6 more months of this before some of my ideas even come to fruition. We'll wait until then. I will wait until then. Will you wait until then? I don't know, but I will. And I think that's the most important thing that matters to me. So, okay. No more questions. There's no more questions. I'll take my leave. Saturday, come bother me again. You can feel free to. More opportunities to do so. If you would like, you can ask me things. You can harass me. You can say terrible things about philosophy majors, and I'll probably agree with all of them. And I will say goodbye. Farewell, everyone. Have a good day. Have a good time. Happy half anniversary of philosophy, man. It's been about like half a week since then, but yes, happy half anniversary. It was quite happy. It was happier than I thought it would be, because I didn't know if it was gonna be happy. I didn't know. 6 months later, when I debuted, I was like, I might just hate this in 6 months. We'll see. And then I'll just like announce that I'm graduating. I'm never coming back. No, I quite like it. It's quite good. Yes, read something happier to wash away the misery. Goodbye.